Frank, we're 3 after. Did you want to wait very long or?
Well, let's wait like 2 more minutes because we have a bunch of people checking in right now. So, but if you haven't done so already, if you could register your name in the chat box, just your name, your organization, and your email. So we are recording this today. Still a little bit of your thunder there, Lyndon. Sorry about that.
What's that? That's all right. I'm gonna repeat it anyway.
I know you are. So in the interest of time, let's get started, and I'll just continue to add people in as we go along.
Okay. Well, let's go ahead and get started. Welcome to the Greater Stockton Chamber of Commerce Recycling Bins Summit. And our theme today is Cutting the Green Take. My name is Lyndon Coffey. I'm co-chair of the Greater Stockton Chamber of Commerce Green Team. Welcome, everyone. Please mute your microphones throughout today's presentation. If you have a question, please use the hand question function or virtually raise your hand so we can see you, and write a short question in the chat box. You'll be called on during the question and answer portion of the summit. Please log your name, organization, and email info on the chat box. I'm going to turn it over to my co-chair, Eddie Tolentino.
Good morning, everyone. Happy Wednesday. My name is Eddie Tolentino with Greif, and I'm currently the co-chair of the Greater Stockton Chamber of Commerce. Commerce's award-winning Green Team San Joaquin program. I'd like to thank the Greater Stockton Chamber of Commerce, Recycling Bin Coalition, California Association Recycling Market Development Zone, and the sponsors of the Chambers, the Green Team San Joaquin, for sponsoring this event. Since its inception, the Chamber's Green Team has been on a mission to help businesses reduce their costs of doing business through environmental stewardship. The Chamber continues with these efforts by hosting today's summit. I'd like to introduce our first speaker, Undersecretary of California Environmental Protection, Serena McElwain. Serena was appointed by Governor Gavin Newsom in March of 2019 as Undersecretary. Ms. McElwain oversees the day-to-day operations of the agency and serves as the principal advisor to the Secretary. She has oversight responsibility of the Office of the Secretary budget, totaling $22 million. She also provides leadership and support to all of the boards, departments, and offices under Cal EPA and Cal EPA's total budget of $4.6 billion. Prior to joining Cal EPA, Ms. McElwain was director of the Office of Continuous Improvement at the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, where she deployed an agency-wide lean management system to improve agency performance, increase productivity, eliminate waste, solve problems, and continuously improve. From 2014 to 2017, she was Assistant Regional Administrator at the Cal EPA's Region 9 in San Francisco. She served as the Senior Resource Officer, Chief Information Officer, and Senior Grants Official supporting the region's 800 federal staff. While at the U.S. Department of Energy from 2011 to 2014, she was the Deputy Assistant Secretary and Chief Operating Officer, servicing as Principal Advisor to the Assistant Secretary for the Office of Fossil Energy. In her first year there, she implemented a new Office for Continuous Improvement. She directed business operations and created a lean culture among the 3,100 federal employees. Ms. McElwain was director of the Office of Business Partner at the U.S. Department of Energy from 2009 to 2011 and director for workforce planning and management at the Architect of the Capitol from 2003 to 2009. She earned a Master of Public Administration from George Mason University and a Master of Science in Administration from Central Michigan University. Thank you, and I turn it over to Serena.
Thank you so much for that, and good morning. So I'm really excited to be here as part of your forum to talk about all the things that I will talk about. I will start with a fun fact about me, and that is I am known in Washington, D.C. and across the country as the lean lady. And that's because every single position that I have taken and every organization that I have helped lead, the very first thing I do is look at how we can cut out unnecessary and redundant non-value added steps to make the organization more efficient and more effective as an organization. And so that is what I do. So I was quite excited to see that you all will be talking about cutting the green and red and blue tape. Just cut the tape. Let's just get rid of the tape. So that's what I do. That's just a part of who I am. So I'm really excited that you all are talking about that in quite detail today. So thanks for having me be a part of that. So you should know that this administration is committed to cutting the green tape, as you all probably know.
I've taken some very copious notes because there's some statements, and you both heard them. There are statements that are just factually wrong.
JC, I think you need to mute yourself. We can all hear you. There you go.
He's muted.
Uh-oh, now our speaker's muted by mistake. There we
Okay,
go.
am I unmuted now? Can you hear me? Okay, all right. Let me start again with the administration piece. So as I said, the administration is committed to cutting the green tape so that we can create more efficiencies for businesses who are interested in sitting in California to further our shared environmental goals. We have just started looking into this strategy, and our plan is to learn from successful programs that the state has already implemented while taking into account today's priorities and new areas of innovation. The nearly 25-year-old consolidated permit process is an example of a prior attempt to address the issue, and one from hello? Okay. And one from which we can learn. However, with any new process for streamlining permitting, we'll need to reflect our current priorities and processes, as well as the complexities of balancing environmental protection with economic development in the current California. So cutting the green tape is so important to me. It's important to Secretary Blumenfield, and again, it is a priority of this administration. So as we're developing this strategy, we will be addressing the permitting process. We look forward actually to hearing from you and from just your ways in which we can be more efficient. And in doing so, we need to make sure that we are not adversely impacting disadvantaged communities, and that we continue to prioritize the protection of our air, water, and land. So your input will be critically important to the success of this effort. And we just simply cannot do it alone. And we will be relying on many of the experts in this conference room just to ensure that we get it right. So as soon as we have more to share on that, we will certainly reach out to offer ways in which we can engage you in that process. Now I'd like to talk about the Recycling Bin Coalition. So 10 years ago, the Recycling Bin Coalition engaged industry, business groups, environmental organizations, recyclers, and local government before national SWORD and other foreign policies challenged our reliance on recycling expert markets. The coalition's vision of build infrastructure now was relevant 10 years ago, and it's still critical and relevant today. So as the governor said about a month ago, this is a climate emergency. Climate change is causing, as many of you know, these unprecedented wildfires in California, and we really need to take action now. So Senate Bill 1383 passed in 2016 as part of California's larger strategy to combat climate change. The law was really designed to reduce the global warming superpollutants like methane, which is up to 84 times more potent than carbon dioxide. So to reduce methane now, we have to move away from landfilling organic waste like food, paper, yard waste. In California, landfills are the third largest producer of methane into our environment. So recycling organic waste and recovering edible food is a fast track to combating climate change. There are many benefits if we successfully implement California's super pollutant reduction strategy, including environmental benefits such as fighting the devastating impacts of climate change, improve air quality, and less landfill waste, providing millions of meals to 1 in 5 Californians who do not have enough to eat, and also creating thousands of new green jobs, which is critical. If international import restrictions taught us anything, it is that we must build and expand recycling in California. And this will make us more resilient to climate change and move us away from dependence on foreign markets for our recyclables. We can reduce methane emissions from landfills and further greenhouse gas reductions in upstream extraction and manufacturing processes. We can benefit disadvantaged communities by upgrading existing facilities where warranted, establishing new state-of-the-art facilities that reduce greenhouse gas emissions and create jobs, as I said before. So by building this infrastructure and fostering innovation, we can increase the use of locally collected recyclables. We can turn our waste stream into a resource that drives the job creation. The governor recently signed another important piece of legislation that it will help to drive expansion of in-state recycling manufacturing. Let's see, AB 793 sets the country's highest standards for post-consumer recycled content in plastic beverage containers, starting with 15% in 2022 and ramping up all the way to 50% by 2030. So AB 793 received a lot of support from industry, and it passed the Assembly and the Senate with no votes, which is great. We have a number of programs at the state to help increase recycling manufacturing infrastructure in California, which will support the state's 75% diversion goal, SB 1383's goal to reduce emissions of short-lived climate pollutants, and the California Global Warming Solutions Act, Assembly Bill 32. So CalRecycle's greenhouse reduction grants and loans and a recyclable market development loan programs provide public funding that when it's combined with private financing can really fuel expansion of our recycling manufacturing infrastructure. The RMDZ loan program, which was established in 1994, it has funded 190 loans to 133 businesses, totaling about 150 million. In addition to that, the businesses contributed over 75 million in matching funds to pay for related project costs. So the greenhouse gas loan program was established in fiscal year 2014 through 2015, and it has funded 5 loans for 4 businesses totaling 7.6 million. So in addition, the businesses contributed 6 million in matching funds to pay for those related project costs. In 2019, 5 fiber, plastic, and glass grants were awarded at over 11.6 million, and 36 food waste prevention and rescue grants were awarded at over 11.2 million. So in recognition of the importance of keeping paper out of the landfills, this year's fiber, plastic, and glass grant program has a special set aside for paper recycling projects. So there are a number of incentive programs that the state provides the recycling manufacturers. One example is the California Alternative Energy and Advanced Transportation Financing Authority. This sales and use tax program for manufacturers has provided millions of dollars to recycling manufacturers, such as Our Planet Earth, as well as material recovery facilities, expanding processing to create cleaner streams of materials. CalRecycle, they provide recycling manufacturing businesses with a wide suite of assistance beyond the loan and grant programs, such as feedstock matching, permitting assistance, and marketing on various platforms, such as the Recycled Content Product Directory and Recycle Store. Additionally, CalRecycle collaborates very closely with the Governor's Office of Economic Development, which is called GoBiz, to provide the full suite of the state's resources to recycling manufacturers. So CalRecycle and GoBiz, each of them assign a liaison to work with each recycling manufacturer. CalRecycle provides its funding assistance and feedstock matching. For example, CalRecycle, they introduce recycling manufacturers to staff at the material recovery facilities so that they can discuss the feedstock agreements. GoBiz, they introduce the businesses to other state incentive programs, such as a tax incentive, other applicable loan and grant funding programs, workforce training reimbursement, and free site selection services. So GoBiz and CalRecycle introduced the company to the staff, including the local enforcement agency, the air quality management district staff, the regional water board staff. And so just by making those warm introductions to staff, it has really proven to be invaluable. And so the business assistance team, they also explain the solid waste permitting process as well. So this collaboration connects recycling manufacturers with all of the state's available resources. And many of the recycling manufacturers that CalRecycle and GoBiz assist that do not receive a loan or a grant, they also recycle thousands of tons of materials and create jobs. So in 2019, 43 recycling manufacturers that requested technical assistance but did not need a loan, those manufacturers reported that they recycled over 2 million tons of material and have created 154 jobs since their operation started. So on average, the CalRecycle and GoBiz team assists 30 to 40 recycling manufacturers each quarter. So for example, 40 recycling manufacturing businesses received business assistance in the third quarter of this year. So I just want to acknowledge now, I'm at the end, the great work that is happening there in Stockton and surrounding areas. To not only host these type of productive conversations, but also to do the work on the ground to build recycling manufacture infrastructure needed to meet our collective recycling and climate goals. It's just critical. You all are doing a great job. So we have a huge opportunity to build the 21st century industry here in California, and we need to take advantage of it like now. That is the end. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much, Serena. I'm Heidi Sanborn with the National Stewardship Action Council. Taking over from here, and I do want to thank you so much for coming and being part of this, Serena, because we do need to have every level of government talking with people on the ground, as you said, to solve these problems, because we have been talking about this for 10 years already, we organized, and we still have a lot of work to do. So, but now is the opportunity for a real big breakthrough, and that's what I'm going to talk about. So at this point, I'm going to share my screen
All right.
and start my PowerPoint deck and get to the beginning here. Okay. Well, thank you. I'm going to give a quick 15-minute overview of what we're going to do today. And I really want to thank Frank Farrell and the Stockton Chamber of Commerce. They have been real green leaders for a very long time. In fact, when I ran the California Product Stewardship Council, our very first Golden Arrow Award for overall best stewardship went to the Stockton Chamber of Commerce Green Team, because they have worked so hard for so long to build bridges and find ways to get our infrastructure built up here in California to manage our own materials. And I think we're all well aware now that we were calling recycling materials that were being shipped overseas to places that couldn't handle it. And it's caused pollution, and some of it's ended up in the air, and some of it's ended up in the water, and we've got to do better. So I'm with now, I'll go a little bit into who I am and why I care so passionately about this issue. But I've been doing this for 30 years now in California, working on materials management, not waste management. I don't believe in waste. And that our vision at the National Stewardship Action Council is that we achieve a circular economy in the United States. And that's a big goal, and we've got a lot of work to do to get there. And to get there, we advocate for a circular economy. But again, I've been in this business a very long time. I was advisor to Linda Moulton Patterson there in the green, who was chair of the Waste Management Board in the first all-female office, in the chair's office, when it was still the California Integrated Waste Management Board. And I left actually to go get my master's in public administration, because I could see that there were real problems in the government side of how we were overseeing some of this stuff. And I wanted to figure out how we could make it better. And I went into consulting, drafted a report on producer responsibility as a baseline for getting upstream and getting to product design. And then I, helped form the California Product Stewardship Council, which then led into the National Stewardship Action Council. And we are a 501c4 nonprofit, meaning we can lobby in any state in the nation. And we collaborate with businesses and others to try and develop producer, it starts with the producer, how things are made. Are they designed to be durable, repairable, recyclable, et cetera? And then everybody has a role in the end, and including the consumer, to get things back to be recycled in a closed loop system. But we really have been focusing on the back end and not the front end. And that's why I'm so passionate about getting to the front end and building a circular economy. And a lot of people talk about a circular economy, but they're not really clear on what that means. And according to the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, it's a multifaceted approach with the focus on producers embracing sustainable design of their products, using regenerative materials, and collecting end-of-life products and materials for continuous use in the economy. So it's not just about designing out waste and pollution and keeping those materials in use, which is what we're going to talk about today. But it's also about regenerating natural systems that we've done a lot of damage to. And we've got a lot of work to get to the regenerative stage. We have to stop doing bad first and then start repairing. But sometimes it can be done together. Now, what is extended producer responsibility? And I actually pulled this slide in late, so I didn't intend for it to be about all household hazardous waste. But I just wanted to focus on the goals of EPR, because we talk about that a lot too, is the shifting of responsibility away from government and taxpayers towards the producers, and providing incentives to them to incorporate environmental considerations in the design of their products. So we've got a lot of market development laws in California. We've got the State Agency Buy Recycled campaign, the Rigid Plastic Packaging Containers Law, minimum content in newsprint, plastic bags, glass. We've got various EPR product stewardship legislation, the recycling market development zones, which Serena mentioned, and well, it was pending legislation. Now, obviously, the market development bill on recycled content passed, thankfully, and was signed by the governor. So we've got a lot of really good baseline to work with here in California. And I wanted to highlight a couple of things, because I really believe that the government needs to walk the talk. If we're going to mandate recycling and high recycling rates, you can't just push it out with mandates. You have to create a market pull for all these materials. And the state has a very big pocketbook that they buy a lot of products every year and could be helping the market pull, and then hopefully citing our infrastructure here in California for that market. So this has been discussed at length in the Recycling Commission, but it's a joint effort between CalRecycle and DGS that they're required to make purchases with post-consumer materials or content products with reporting, but they've only got 11 categories of materials in the law now, and at least 50% of the purchases instead of a much higher percentage, or hopefully 100% of the purchases, helping to drive the market. And so this needed a lot of review, and the Recycling Commission actually did look at this, and you can see on the right under the column of the percent of state agency by recycled campaign compliance spending, some agencies and some materials like tires at the bottom, it's only 6% compliant. Antifreeze is at 93%. But again, we can vote with our dollars, starting with state and local government to help create these markets. That would help a lot at bringing the infrastructure back. And again, right now in 2018-19, we spent 80% of the purchases of the state under those very narrow parameters were compliant. But you can see there's still, of the total of what the state spends, still 87%, 2.6 billion was not. So that's why this program, we think, needs to be updated. And so this, one of the first recommendations the commission has made and put in the draft policy recommendations report, it's not final yet, we'd love your input, but is that we clarify that the state start covering all purchases of state goods, not only by the state, but by its contractors, that we include service contracts where the contractor is purchasing these reported recycled products, revise the categories of products and the minimum content percentages. They need to be reviewed and updated. And somebody, I think, has background noise. Lauren, if you could mute yourself, thank you. And then removing the requirement to purchase only when it's available and at a lesser cost. Sometimes we need to help drive the market. And so forth. So there's a few updates we want to make to this, and the commission is working on, but that's creating that market pull from what we control at the state and local government level. But in general, if we're going to get to a circular economy, we have to think differently. And I've been told that actually it wasn't Einstein who said this, so I'm not feeling very smart about this slide now, but whoever said it, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different result. We clearly have to do something different if we're going to have a different result. And what we've been doing hasn't been working nearly enough. So one of the things I wanted to highlight in market development is that we could do things like eco-modulated fees. And one of the things that in the carpet stewardship, mattress programs, and paint programs, they all have a visible fee to the customer that they pay and the industry manages to recycle those products. In the bill we passed in AB 729 here in California by member 2, it actually, for the first time in the United States, as far as we're aware, required a eco-modulated fee, which is a differential assessment that takes into account the financial burden of a particular type of carpet. And so it would be a higher fee for those that have a higher environmental impact, or a lower fee or no fee if there is, if the product is highly recyclable, designed with this recycled content. There's a whole series of things that we can do. But again, it's following the money and making sure that the consumer can understand and help us by making good purchases, by having real accurate market signals when they buy products. Right now, you can see we've circled, there's an eco fee on carpet. You'll see that, but that's really just the fee to go back to run the program. And in the future, it's going to be including an eco-modulated fee based on the type of carpet it is and if it's recyclable. This particular eco-modulation of fees is widely used throughout Europe, and actually there's a suggestion that I believe they've mandated that by 2023 it's going to be a mandated thing for all the EPR systems in Europe. And currently they're doing that on packaging in Germany and and also in France and in other countries. And there's lots of different varieties of it, but I just wanted to give you a sense of some of the other tools in the toolbox to drive markets. And I'm really honored to be the elected chair of the State Commission on Recycling Markets and Curbside Recycling. We can thank Assemblymember Susan Eggman for this bill that legislated this commission. Many of the people on this call helped pass that bill. And the reason I'm really excited about it is because I feel like this is the conversation we've needed to have for a very long time. It pushes 17 people from different backgrounds, waste haulers, environmental groups, and others, to focus on giving consensus policy advice to CalRecycle and the legislature on what we need to do to fix a whole series of problems. We are tasked with increasing market demand for post-consumer materials, demand for recycled content products, which again, Wayne just talked about with the recycling market or state agency by recycle campaign, promoting systems that yield high quality feedstock, promoting competitive collection and use of the quote unquote waste materials, meeting the state's waste reduction goals. And I can say we're failing miserably right now. We were supposed to be at 75% this year. We were in 2018 at 40%, and we haven't gotten the 2019 numbers, but I'm hearing they're not good, and they'll come out next month. So we're literally going backwards. Like, we've got a lot of work to do, and fast, and we can create a lot of jobs and infrastructure if we can get some barriers out of the way. And then meeting the state's methane emission goals, obviously. So there's a link to the commission. It's on the CalRecycle website. I will state that there's a law that has come into play that has made it very difficult for us to share some of the working documents of the commission. But if you go to that website now, even though the state can't post them due to accessibility standards, we have started an hold Google document that it is linked from the CalRecycle page so that you can see the documents the commission's working on. And this is the list of the 17 commissioners and their affiliations. Some of them are on the call and part of our presentation today, including Alex O'Segura with Waste Management. And somebody please mute yourself, Kylie. Thank you. And we also have John Davis with us, who's chair of our Market Development Committee. And Alex, I believe, is vice chair of the Recycling Committee. But we've got several others on the call as well. And also Assemblymember Eggman bill just was signed by the governor that changed our deadlines. Initially, we were given a deadline of January 1st for our final recommendations, which was really, really, really challenging. I don't think we could have done it. So we're very glad to have until July 1st now for the final recommendations. But due to the legislative session, beginning of a 2-year session in January, we are working very hard to get some of what we're calling the low-hanging fruit, hopefully easy to agree on consensus recommendations to the legislature and CalRecycle by January 1st. So that will get the thing started, and then we're going to have probably some more difficult conversations and more in-depth conversations in the spring. And we encourage you all to follow us. Again, I'm chair. Richard Valle is vice chair. He's also chair of the Alameda County Supervisors and also with TriSaid Disposal. So our commissioners are very, very competent, long-term people in this industry. I think it was a great commission that was seated, and we're working very, very hard to be thoughtful and come up with some really good recommendations. And again, we organized by having 4 committees: market development, organics, recycling, labeling, and media. And our charge, again, is to develop policy recommendations to meet the market development goals that we've kind of already gone over, so I won't go over those again. But we're also supposed to make sure that CalRecycle has advice on how to meet our state mandate of 75% of solid waste being source reduced, recycled, or composted by this year. And we know that's just not going to happen. We didn't get seated until July, and we haven't even gotten the recycling numbers from 2019. And we're hearing they're worse than they were the year before, which was only 40%. So we're literally, really far off, like 40, 50% off of where we should be. And so we've got a lot of work to do. It can't be done fast enough. I mean, honestly, I'm at the point where I feel like let's talk, but let's develop a plan today on what to do to actually start fixing some of these problems. That's how I'd love to leave today. We also have to reduce our organics going to landfills, 50% by this year, which again, I can't see how that could happen. And then 75% by 2025, that we could possibly make, but we've got to make a lot of changes and get a lot more going in that direction. We're also to recommend feedback to the department on public messaging and what products and just defining recyclable or compostable. And that's a big deal because when you define recyclable, that labels a certain product as non-recyclable if they're not in the recyclable category or the composting category. That's a very big deal. And we've got a lot of work to do to narrow that down. We've started and had great discussions, but there's much more to come. So our purpose, again, meet all these goals. We've organized by committee. The committees come up with policy proposals. They bring them to the commission meetings, which are they're the first and third Wednesdays for 4 hours from 8:30 to 12:30. Those are all listed on the CalRecycle webpage. And then we will have 2 readings. The commission decided at the last meeting, we're going to have a first reading, putting the draft language into the draft report and let everybody see what it looks like. And then we'll do a second reading and a second vote of the full commission before it's actually finalized in the report. And until obviously it's submitted, it's not final, but there's lots of time between the committees and the commission to make sure everybody can keep up with us and provide comments, which we really encourage. So again, we've gone through some of these, but the Organics Committee is tasked with achieving these goals. Infrastructure capacity is one of them. We've got huge permitting problems, which will be talked about today. It should not take 12 years to get an organics permit if we have goals that we're not meeting today for that. And again, state agencies, we need Caltrans and others to be buying the organics materials we produce. If we don't have that market pull, there's nothing to do with the material once we've made it. And again, defining recyclable, very, very challenging. We're trying and having a lot of conversations about this, but we're coming up with a plan and we encourage you all to weigh in. These 7 things on the right are the checklist of issues that we're using to decide whether something is recyclable. And again, appreciate your feedback on that. So again, we'll submit our draft recommendations January 1st, and for the first final, we're seated for 2 years and we do updates every year at a minimum. I'm hoping that this will continue for a long time. We've got a lot of work to do and gives the legislature some comfort that when it comes from the commission, there's broad consensus around certain ideas that they'd feel comfortable legislating. We also have a labeling and media committee, and they're trying to, again, figure out how do we label things to be easy for the public to follow. So one of the big ideas is label something either trash or landfill or some name, recyclable or compostable, which is exactly how their bins are most of the time, most of the state. But again, it sounds simple and it's easy for the customer to understand on where to put things in the bins, but it's very, very hard for business to figure out how do I get from the non-recyclable or trash into the recyclable category when there's a chicken and egg and we need material back to build up the infrastructure. So we're discussing all these things now. In the Organics Committee, they've made great progress. They have some food recovery policy proposals, a precautionary principle proposal, which those I believe should be posted for the commission on the Google Docs now. If not, just email me at heidi@nsaction.us. I'll make sure those get up. And then we've been discussing things like problem products, like getting the labels, these wrap labels off the plastics that then make them non-recyclable, or banning green PET, which in other countries has been banned for a long time because that does is considered basically a contaminant in the system. And so again, here's the links. I'll leave this slide deck with Frank and the team, and everybody can have a copy of it so you can link to all these things. But we encourage you to subscribe to the listserv to keep up with the commission because we are making market development recommendations and to give us public input. There's a portal there. We need your comments. We need help to get everybody going in the same direction. And again, this is the list. Our next meeting will be November 4th, 8:30 to 12:30. It's all webcast, and we at NSAC, because it takes the state some time to make them accessible, we record the videos and upload them to our website as soon as we can after the meeting. So you can get them on our NS Action website and review those commission meetings. So these are all the people that are paying for my time, and I just wanted to say thank you to all of them. We work all over the country, and we hope California will lead the nation, but it is definitely time to build infrastructure now in California. This is at the top left is the Aquafil carpet recycling plant that's sited in Woodland after we've passed a couple bills to tighten up the carpet stewardship law. The one in the bottom left is the first plant they built in the U.S. To recycle carpet, which is in Phoenix. We really wanted them to site in California. They did, but now they're literally having trouble getting enough carpet, even though 80% of the carpet is not making it to being recycled right now. As far as I know, those are the best numbers. So we need infrastructure now, and we've got to figure out if companies like Aquafil invest in plants like this and they can't get the feedstock, they're not going to stay. We've got to fix these things now, and we've got to create incentives for the businesses to come and stay in California. And before I leave we did join the California Foundation for the Environment and the Economy, and we did a study trip. The first one was last year where we went to Vancouver, BC, and to Seattle, and we took legislators, our State Treasurer Fiona Ma's in the middle. I'm there with a very crooked hat, but even Jared Blumenfeld is on the far right, and he was there, Eric Potashner, so many others. But we were trying to get an education level up and spend a lot of time on these issues because legislators see 2,200 bills a year, and they need to really have the space to understand what we do in this industry and how we might be able to solve them. So we're excited. We just came back from our second trip. We went this year to Seattle and Portland, Oregon, and saw everything from a Covanta plant to a refillable beer bottle program and their bottle bill, which is much more, it's got a lot more convenience than ours does at this point. So we've got a lot of education of a lot of people to do, but I'm really excited how many legislators are so interested in our issue and ready to help. So just remember to vote and be the change you want to see in the world. And I'll leave you with this. Leaders think and talk about solutions. Followers think and talk about the problems. So I know we're all leaders here, and I look forward to working with everybody so that we can really start solving these problems and make much more headway than we have in the last decade. So with that, I will turn it over to John Davis, I believe, who is going to be heading up the next discussion on market development.
Thank you, Heidi. I think you need to stop screen sharing, and then I will, there we go. See if it, all right. Yeah, so Heidi set up, I think, this discussion with, by referring to the committee, and the Market Development Committee of the Commission has been looking at ways to streamline permitting. My background is almost 50 years now, totally in local government and in California. I started in city management, worked in county administration, community development, economic development, redevelopment, and then became involved really just before AB 939 came around, working on solid waste issues and morphed that into recycling programs, which has been my pretty much full-time since 1990. I administer a joint powers authority, 9 communities in San Bernardino County, desert and mountain communities, 8 cities, and the unincorporated county. So we've been a part of the Recycling Market Development Zone program since about, I think, 1994. So I'm very familiar with that, as is other people on the call, like Frank Farrell from obviously Greater Stockton Chamber, the organizer of this work, and Steve Lautsey, who's now retired from local government, but the two of them really started the BIN Coalition and allowed me to help with them write the early manifestos and thoughts that went into the idea of building infrastructure. And that idea of building infrastructure, as was mentioned, was prior to the loss of export markets. When California began rolling out programs around in the early 1990s, it was supply-based. They were supply-based programs. We were mandated to keep materials out of landfills, to divert materials out of landfills, and our supply of materials coincided with China's efforts to industrialize that country. And so they reached out and secured a lot of our feedstocks. I remember wondering, along with other people, what were we going to do with mixed paper? We were going to be capturing this paper, but we weren't really sure where it was going to go. And it ended up going with cardboard to China, making packing material to send products around the world. So China had a huge influence, but we were exporting not just raw materials, we were also exporting wealth, business opportunities, and jobs, a lot of jobs. And the estimates of up to 100,000 potential jobs in California have been floating around for several decades if we kept that material here and used it. So there were plenty of reasons to initiate the effort 10, 11 years ago to build infrastructure in California. We've had pretty good luck with some materials. There's quite a few plastics processors, and probably we'll see more of that as at least minimum content for plastic beverage containers go forward. But paper's still an issue. So the work that the Market Development Committee has been doing is focused on cutting the green tape. To paraphrase Cali PA's Secretary Jared Blumenthal, we need to make it easy to do the right thing. We certainly need to make it easier. And there is a process. If you received an invitation to the summit, you also received a précis of the consolidated permit process at Cali PA. So the Commission's Market Development Committee used that process as a starting point. It's already on the books, and it sets out a pretty explicit process, not a guarantee of a permit, but a process to secure a permit involving state agencies. And those state agencies for air and water include the local water boards and air quality management districts. So what we're discussing at the Market Development Committee and now at the full Commission is to combine that process with local agencies using the Permit Streamlining Act and something that local agencies are already subject to. All local agencies must provide information to project developers about permit streamlining. And then there's this consolidated permit process at Cali PA. So how do we mesh the two? Economic development is local, right? It's the buildings take, or the projects come onto the ground in cities and counties across California. They don't all happen in Sacramento, and they don't happen in every city or every county, but there are locations that welcome industrial development, would welcome recycling-based manufacturing. The Recycling Market Development Zone program is intended to be a partnership between the state and local governments to help site those facilities. So how do we make that happen? And that's the discussion point today. Second set of discussion around projects that address significant greenhouse gas reduction through recycling and composting. So there are two real factors on greenhouse gas reduction. One is a material specific factor that measures the amount of methane reduction or the amount of carbon dioxide produced through energy use. So recycling-based manufacturers, more energy-based, where organics projects take organic material out of landfills, and methane is generated in sites like landfills and lack of oxygen. So you get a short-lived reduction of methane through composting or anaerobic digestion. The greenhouse gas reduction through recycling is avoiding the virgin materials cost of energy. So once you determine those factors, you multiply that by the tons, how much material is out there. The largest segment of material going into California landfills now is organic material. It's about 34% of what goes into landfills. The second largest still is paper. And I'll show you a couple slides in a moment, but it's more than what goes into landfills because we're recovering paper and recovering quite a bit of it, but it's being exported and not being recycled in California, where we have a much greener, more renewable and less climate impact energy grid system. So that the last idea is to focus on pilot projects, get some things going immediately. There are these laws on the books. We know we could call on them, but we don't need to. As Serena mentioned, the Governor's Office of Business Assistance and Local Development works to assist projects with permitting activities, and they work with CalRecycle already. So we know that we can bring together from the Governor's Office, from Cal EPA, from CalRecycle, through RMDZs or other local government initiatives. We know we have the ability to bring everybody together to work on significant projects that have substantial benefit, and we could be doing it now. We could start today. So I want to talk about paper, and that's set up the discussion around paper. The Market Development Committee heard a presentation from the American Forest and Paper Association recently, and they summarized the scope of activity in California. We don't think that there's a lot of paper recycling or paper industry activities in California, but there are almost 22,000 people employed in California in the paper industry. 1 million tons a year of recovered paper goes to 12 mills across the state. And the sum of the payroll, almost $2 billion, nearly $11 billion in products shipped, $500 million in local tax paid. And so there's a presence now with these industries in California. Not sure you can see this slide, but it shows the location of those mills. They are concentrated more in Southern California. And here's a list of the mills that are shown on the map, what their manufacturing type are. These are older mills. They've been around for a while. It's difficult to site facilities, as we mentioned, and we're not seeing new paper mills. So that's to be discussion today. As we look at what the mills are using or creating, it's container board, paper board, construction paper, roofing paper, and some tissue paper. So there's a lot of different uses for different feedstocks. And we have those feedstocks. You can see here how much paper we're shipping out of California. So if those 12 mills are using 1 million tons, we're shipping multiples of that at the peak in almost 8 million. So we have material that's going out of these ports. CalRecycle estimates about 80% of the material leaving California is from California. And so we have quite a bit of material, about 8 million tons at least, that we could call on that's leaving the state. And those numbers have been changing in direction, but not changing really significantly in the total number of tons now compared to the peak periods in 2015. These are mills that closed, and this is part of, I think, the issue that we really need to face up to: what's causing operating facilities to close. How do we overcome some of these issues, and can we move forward with new mills? Older mills have issues that new ones don't, but new mills have their own set of issues, and we're gonna be facing those if we can begin to turn the corner. So we're going to talk about two projects today. Paper mills need pulp. They operate on taking recovered paper, pulping it, and using that pulp to make new paper products. And Ron Sassine, the Crossroads project in Utah, combines those two aspects of pulping and then making container board. Eric Herbert's project in Chesapeake, Virginia, is a project that focuses on pulping. So we're going to start with Eric to focus on the pulping side of things. And I've known Eric for, I don't know, Eric, 25 years or more. Eric was an engineer on a materials recovery facility that we built in Victorville and opened in 1995. And then he gravitated into the solid waste industry and moved from two of the large haulers in Southern California to a company, VHS, Bulk Handling Systems. Eric started one of their subsidiary companies, Zero Waste Energy, built anaerobic digestion facilities in California, beginning with the San Jose project, and is now the president of VHS, and also the president of their subsidiary company, Total Fiber Recovery, who's building this Chesapeake pulping plant. So Eric, I'm going to stop sharing, and that should let you take over and share your screen.
Thanks, John. Let me see if I can do this well. How does that look? All right. Appreciate the introduction, John. Yes, we've been working on recycling issues since the early 90s, and we are approaching this issue on paper from a recycling perspective. You know, as John mentioned, I head up the BHS group of companies. You know, it's by a lot of different brands, including Bulk Handling Systems, NEHOT, NRT, Max AI, which is our robotics and artificial intelligence and vision systems, and of course, Zero Waste Energy. So all of those companies are geared towards recycling and recovery within the solid waste space. One of the things we've done over the years is extend into different areas that further recover those materials. So I'll use the example, we're going to talk about paper in a moment, but we've now built 6 secondary plastics recovery plants. And when we talk about the PET bottle-to-bottle programs, that's one of our big, strong areas. And we're building 2 plants right now for customers in that space. So we saw paper in a very similar way, although different dynamics. And so we founded Total Fiber Recovery to really extend that secondary processing so that we could keep the paper recycling alive throughout the country, and connect, where the supply of recycled, fiber is to where that material is needed. So what I'm going to do is talk a little bit about what we're doing, kind of how it works, what we're doing from a project standpoint, and focus in on our first project in Chesapeake and try to use some of those things as examples for how those things go about, permitting and siting those facilities elsewhere. I will say up front, we are in discussions and have been developing a couple of projects in California. and I've had conversations with, GoBiz and the treasurer's office and all the things we're used to doing with respect to that. And so, we are in that process, but I think the discussion here in terms of, cutting the green tape and making things easier, especially as we talk about, regional agencies and whatnot, I think would be extremely helpful. The other thing I'll say is I know there's a discussion on organics after this. That's also an area that's very important to me based on our zero waste energy business and some things we're working on there too. And I know Neil's going to be talking about that, so happy to help there too. All right. Real quickly, our mission is to produce pulp from mixed paper and old corrugated containers. And really this is to further process those recycled materials so they can be used by others. And that's both domestic and obviously Asia. There's a major dislocation still in the marketplace. China is still needing pulp. They wanted the recycled fiber, but obviously with the various environmental regulations, that's been blocked. You now have recycled fiber going to other places throughout Asia to try to be, pulped and sent back into China because the demand for the packaging still exists, and that we don't see that changing for extended periods of time. Won't get into all the dynamics of the green, the green fence and national sword and all that stuff, but I will just say this: the demand is there, the supply is here, and the economics are still very favorable for recycling to pulp, to make paper and boxboard, and it's still very favorable to go from the U.S. to China in that regard. Our company is in the process of working with others in the industry, the recycling industry, to really cite about 5 facilities. That's what we've identified and we've been working on in key strategic markets where there's the content of recycled fiber available. So, we'll talk about tonnages here in a moment, and also logistics. One of the key parameters in terms of making the economics successful and have been successful is that there is, as most of you know, a very inexpensive backhaul of containers going from certain U.S. ports back into certain China ports. So those logistics still exist today. In fact, they're even better than I've seen over the last 20 years in terms of cost, and we'll talk about some of those. But they exist at certain ports because of where those containers are coming in from. When we looked at different locations on both the west and east coasts, the Chesapeake facility that we'll talk about in a moment kind of popped up as one that was available, and the process just worked very fast there. So that's really why it's our first location. Also, the costs, when we talk about doing business in California versus doing business in other places, all I can say is that it's substantially cheaper to be in places like Chesapeake, Virginia, both in terms of energy costs and labor costs, cost of construction. Everything is just substantially cheaper. But we are moving forward in the development process in other locations. The other is John mentioned briefly about old mills and the paper industry here in the United States. As all industries, the technology has advanced quite a bit. Our approach to this was to use the best-in-class technologies. So we actually have a relationship with one of the largest makers of pulping equipment, a company called Black Clawson that's owned by Cadent. We actually work with them on some of the other products. But Black Clawson has built most of the pulpers in Asia. And so it's a very familiar technology and very easy to basically drop in. When we look at it from just a real high level process flow, all we're doing is taking in that mixed paper and corrugated. And I will tell you that mixed paper in and of itself has somewhere between 20 and 40% old corrugated containers in it. We're seeing more of it now than we have in the past, but it is there. American OCC is a highly sought after fiber within the pulping process because it's generally speaking virgin and has high tensile strength along fiber. So highly sought after in terms of international markets. But our process, and I won't go through all this, really just mimics the front end of a paper mill. So What we're really doing is taking that material, pulping it, which yes is basically taking it into a large vat and a lot of water and some chemicals, and really mechanically pulping it down. So just basically getting all that free. But then what you have is then a series of cleaning steps, because even if the material coming in is very low in contamination, 5% non-paper contamination in recycled fiber is extremely low. And I will tell you that some of the issues we had with recycled fiber being shipped overseas, when those bales had 15 to 20%, non-paper contamination inside of them. Besides the non-paper, you also have, on about average, about 6% of what we'll call non-pulpable paper in there. So anyway, so there are losses as through the system, but the key is having clear steps in the process to pull those contaminants out, which were shown here in terms of how this is done. And this is very typical of what we'll call the wet end of a paper plant. After that, though, then we take that pulp after that coarse screen, and then we really then go through a process of now dewatering it and drying it and then packaging it for shipment. Obviously there's losses in the system. So you can see that when you start with 231 metric tons per year and you end up with 203,000 metric tons per year. Again, roughly this is about 600 tons a day. It's a 24/7 operation. So we do have, as is shown there, we do have some losses through the system that are contamination that does have to be disposed. So that's the process. So again, when we talk about the balance of the paper making process, you go from that coarse screen, and then you go to additional screening, and then you go into the paper making process. We're not doing that. And the reason we're not doing that is because we see a market available for pulp, and it's becoming quite a dialogue internationally. We're working with the largest broker and marketer of pulp, both virgin pulp and recycled pulp in the world, that's basically committed to buying up all of our pulp and shipping it throughout the world. But I will say there are also areas domestically where pulp is coming in higher demand because some of the sources of recycled fiber are diminishing. And so we've been talking to certain people. We talk about drywall and egg cartons and all kinds of different things that can be used for that. Turning now to our first facility, Chesapeake, just to give some highlights, and I'll show a couple of pictures, and I'll be done, and we can move to questions and other discussions. But it was a former C&D waste facility. The reason why we liked that is it already had a lot of permits in place for traffic and movement of materials. It also very uniquely had barge access on the Elizabeth River. So originally this was set up to take construction and demolition waste out of the city of New York by barge to this facility. So it gave us a better reach in terms of sourcing recycled fiber, although most of our fiber is coming from the local catchment area. So we are in discussions of bringing some New York fiber down. Permitting was pretty straightforward because we fell into that same envelope as a C&D facility. It was just revised processes. So a lot of the impacts were the same. So we were able to just go through local city use and zoning. It took us 8 months, and most of that was just, the time to take to get documents done and go through the various procedural steps. Most importantly, we received really strong and I'll call very engaged support from the governor's office in Virginia, the state of Virginia Economic Development Authority, the Port Authority. We'll be shipping out of the Norfolk Port Complex, which has 4 different facilities, as I recall, for shipping for different types. And also the city of Chesapeake, both the city, the council, and the economic development agencies. They all came forward in a very coordinated way, which is the point I want to try to make. Coordinated through the governor's office, a very coordinated way to make sure that we could leverage this maximum amount of grants, tax abatements, and permitting support. And then ultimately support through the Virginia Small Business Financing Authority, which is a tax-exempt financing for private activities. So similar to what the Treasurer's Office does in California, very similar program in Virginia. In fact, a lot of the people that we're using as underwriters and whatnot are do the California work too. So For us, this has been a very easy process for a new facility, and been very supportive in terms of our efforts. Here's the site itself, existing facility there in red, the big red building. So it fits well with us. It's very high bay. As you can see, it's on the Elizabeth River with barge access and offloading of materials there. It was a C&D facility, as I noted earlier, with a lot of equipment here outside, and all of that's going to be redone. Just to give you a sense of scale, we're really, everything is less than 60,000 square feet of space with different areas. I'll give you a 3D view here in a second, but just to give you a sense of the size. So not an overly large facility by any stretch of the imagination. Kind of a cutaway view of it. You've got material coming in and via truck and basically being processed through that process area, which is really the pulper and the screens. Then we have a large dryer system, and then packaging through baling and cross wrapping, and then shipment out. So again, very straightforward process. A lot of logistics that are part of it. Most of the issues in terms of permitting focus on the typical waste handling, which is traffic, trucks in and out, and then obviously air emissions, which the focus is primarily on the emissions coming from the dryer. One of the questions we always get asked is about water. Because we are drying the material through the pulp, we're losing obviously a lot of water. So we need net water going in. We can use reclaimed water, which is very typical. They don't have reclaimed water in Chesapeake, so it's just a regular water supply. But we're recycling most of it within the process. Some amount of discharge, very minor, which has also been pre-treated before discharge into the sewer. But the water flows are, it's about 90 gallons a minute of flow into the process, because that's what we're losing through the drying process. So not a lot of impacts to review. Everything is enclosed other than the dryer. And so the process, as I said, has been relatively straightforward. We have looked at this from the standpoint of packaging this and permitting in California, and because of our experience doing a lot of projects in California, there's some additional pollution control on the dryer system, an RTO, for those that are interested in the technical. And that's, again, what we can pretty much do to meet the air emission requirements. So that's an overview of the project. John, hopefully that covers the four corners there for you.
Eric, thanks. It's always an education listening to Eric because he not only presents the details, he knows the details, and I think it's that focus on details that's made his work so successful. And so when I heard about this project, I was really enthused because again, we need paper facilities, and I've heard from people for the last 30 some years that we'll never see paper mills in California to handle the material. So I think that may have been true 30 years ago, but hopefully it's not true. So
appreciate that, John.
I'm going to ask Frank Farrell how we want to handle questions. And I want to ask if people have immediate questions about Eric's presentation. Now would be a good time to.
Well, John, I'd recommend if he's going to be around for a couple more moments, let's get through your second presentation, and then we'll ask questions at the after that.
Okay.
If that's okay, Eric.
Yeah, I'll be happy to stay around. Thanks.
Great.
At this time, if could everyone mute their microphone? If we just let the speaker, like Ron coming up, is going to speak that way. There's no background kids doing algebra or whatever the case.
And I'm hearing Alex Souza. So Alex, if you could mute, that would be good. So
mine's muted, John. So I just unmuted, but mine's muted.
No, Alex Souza,
Alex,
not the other Alex. There you go.
Alex is out there.
Okay, I'm seeing that. So I want to introduce Ron Sassine next. I was, I was kind of blown away when I saw that someone was building a pulp and paper mill in Salt Lake City. I've worked in the desert for decades, and if there's issues about paper mills and water use, generally the issues about paper mills, water use in desert communities has to be much greater, and especially if the place is known for a lake full of salt for their main the main adjacent water. It becomes a even more surprising. So when I heard about Crossroads Paper, I really wanted to learn more about it. I started reading articles and then attended a webinar where Ron spoke, learned something about his background as director of packaging for Walmart after spending time in the paper industry, and then learned that he and his brother really conceived this project. And I'm sure he'll talk more about it since his brother operates a recycling facility in the Salt Lake City area. So the project is different than the project Eric describes. It's begins with pulping, but actually goes on to make a paper product to serve really a regional market. So it's a project focused really on that local domestic market, and really fits on our whole concept of building infrastructure. And so, Ron, why don't you take it from here and tell us about Crossroads?
Thank you, John. And I would like to thank you and Frank for your work in putting this meeting together today, and for extending the invitation. That's very kind of you, and I'm very grateful for it. Also, I want to thank Undersecretary McElwain for her words this morning, an outstanding overview of where California is and where California is headed. And again, my thanks to Heidi Sanborn. I've been following you for quite a number of years, and we've had the chance to interact over my time at Walmart and in other ways. And it's great to be sharing the video conference with you all this morning. I noticed that we are about an hour and 15 minutes in, and no one has yet mentioned the Dodgers, so I'll have to take that upon myself as a native Californian. There we go. Thank you, John. As a native Californian, I'll tell you that some of my fondest memories are sitting with my grandmother in her home in Whittier, listening to Vin Scully do play-by-play, and it's exciting. So congratulations to you all. With that, let me take a minute and share with you a few minutes and share with you our vision for Crossroads Paper and how we're developing the project. What you've just seen from Eric is very helpful in that it lays out the initial stage of what we will do, and we'll add some additional detail to that. But the context is this: paper-based packaging plays a critical role in our modern economy. For both industrial and personal use, we spend an extremely large amount of time moving and shipping and transporting products, and all of that requires packaging. I've been in the packaging business for 30 years, worked globally in this industry, and have seen the impact that packaging has on making economies viable. In the state of Utah, all packaging paper is imported into the state from locations primarily along the East Coast and some in the far Pacific Northwest. But as the economy grows and changes and digital takes over a greater role, the role of packaging as well is shifting. Now, our objectives in developing this project is to serve a growing market for containerboard in the Western United States. Now, containerboard is an umbrella term that describes the materials used to create corrugated boxes. They're generally brown. Occasionally, you'll see a white or bleached version of containerboard on some upscale products. But these brown papers that create inner and outer layers and the corrugated medium in between are critical to developing high-strength shipping materials that are low-cost, highly efficient, and easy to recycle. What we've also discovered is that there's a massive availability of recycled materials in the Western United States that are not being used for all the reasons that John went through in his presentation. All of those materials currently are shipped out of the state and incur extremely unnecessary freight costs on outbound shipments. Similarly, all the container board that comes into the state has to be shipped in using expensive trucking and expelling the CO2 that comes from diesel engines. Opportunities to grow exist for expanding the manufacturing footprint in the state and creating additional employment opportunities. Now, we're going to show you in a brief moment here a little bit about how this all lays out geographically, but the opportunity of the market is this. Paper production is concentrated in the Southeast, the Upper Midwest, and the Pacific Northwest. Paper production in North America follows the fiber. It follows the types of trees that generate strong fibers for use in paper packaging. There is, as a result of that, a significant deficit in the Western United States between the amount of paper required for box making and the amount of paper manufactured to service those customers. The demand in the Intermountain West is driving an increase in those long distance shipments and high associated freight costs and greenhouse gas emissions. By providing a location in the region to maximize the use of locally generated recyclables, cut down on long distance shipping, and create usable locally required materials, we've been able to package together all three of these market drivers. The global supply and demand imbalance that Eric touched on affects North America as well, and we've got an approach to help solve that. If you take a look at the map, you'll see where we're headed. The production of containerboard, those underlying materials, is spread throughout the Pacific Northwest in a couple of mills, a few regional mills down in California that John touched on, and then a series of mills across the southern United States and primarily the upper Midwest. If you look at this large open space in the middle of the country, you'll see where we've come to realize that our market, our opportunity to serve the market lands uniquely in the Intermountain West. Now, tell you a little bit about what this project entails. There's a very sophisticated effort around the engineering, the machinery procurement, and the construction of a paper mill. As Eric so wonderfully laid out, these are complicated systems. In the case of paper making, there's the additional system of taking that wet fiber that has been created in the pulping process and then producing it on a very complex, very high-speed production line. I like to describe paper mills as a very long and narrow production footprint, because your goal is to go as fast as you can from one end to the other and dry that fiber into a usable, strong paper substrate. As a result, we've also gone through a very detailed approach to our market assessment and evaluating where does the mill fit, who will it serve, how will it be serviced by raw material generators, and what's the best possible way to match the production of the mill to the demand in the market. Now, John touched on about 1 million tons of recycled fiber being used by mills in California today. This mill that we're designing will use 350,000 tons a year by itself. And so you can see we've got a more modern approach. We're using state-of-the-art global scale production that uses less water, that's more energy efficient, and creates an opportunity to drive more production through a modern facility than you would find in an aggregate of much older facilities. About a year ago, we gathered together a group of about 200 industry players at a meeting held up at the University of Utah. We were very fortunate to have leading recyclers, leading environmental groups, state and government officials, all there to listen to us explain and get a better understanding of how this project would work. We set up information booths, and after a brief introduction and a film about the project, we invited people to go from booth to booth and learn about water management, paper making, recycling, collection, sortation, all of those processes that will feed this cycle that the mill depends upon. In the center of the photograph, you may notice, in addition to the two founders of the project, we have the Lieutenant Governor of the state of Utah, Lieutenant Governor Spencer Cox. We have the Deputy Chief of Staff to the Governor, Gary Herbert, and we have the head of the Governor's Office of Economic Development, who all participated in and spoke at our announcement and shared the government of Utah's interest in moving forward. We were fortunate in the impact that this had both in industry press and in the nationwide press about the role of this recycling operation in the state. Now, let me share a few thoughts about what goes into selecting a site for a paper operation. Critically, you look at the geotechnical characteristics of the land. Paper-making operations are high speed, they are large pieces of equipment, and as a result, the stability of the ground upon which that machine track is laid is absolutely fundamental. Anything less than a perfectly stable piece of land introduces manufacturing and operational concerns that can be very significant in the long run. Access to water and a cooperative view of water treatment facilities is critical. I began my career in a recycling mill 30 years ago, and I have worked in the recycling and the virgin paper manufacturing process for the last 30 years. What I can tell you about water treatment is the big systems that existed at virgin mills back in the 80s and 90s. The new recycled mills are a much smaller, tighter, and more water efficient system than we had seen installed in previous decades. And as a result, much of the water treatment that we see today with modern mills is being routed through local and municipal water treatment facilities. And so that's why this cooperative approach is so important. We're grateful to have a very good partnership with state and county officials, as you noticed from the previous photos. And we're really important, what's really important to us, again, is the over the road access to major thoroughfares, whether it's Interstate 80, whether it's I-15, both of which eventually land in California. Those over the road access points are absolutely critical to us. Now, let me take a minute and talk to you about paper mill operations. In addition to this stock preparation area that Eric discussed and mentioned, that repulping of existing fiber, we also have what goes on in the paper making process. But let me take just a moment here and compare what used to happen in the traditional pulping world with the modern recycled paper mill world. In earlier years, you would locate a paper mill as close to the fiber source as you could, because you needed that pine tree fiber as the foundation of your operation. Today, recycled mills are basing their raw material needs on used corrugated boxes. Those boxes that collect at MRFs, in homes, at the back of a Walmart store, all of those bales of old corrugated containers are a perfectly usable and beneficial fiber source. I often describe it as an urban forest because that is in fact what it is. Material that is usable, that has beneficial value, can be captured and deployed in support of a new manufacturing operation. The water source, again, in the old days, we're all out of natural rivers. I can remember, when I was working with mills in the state of Virginia, driving down and seeing the mills located along the James River because that was where the water needed to come from. And the same goes for older mills around the world. In newer mills, we often see the ability to source water off of municipal and local water supplies, whether it's from a water conservancy district, whether it's groundwater rather than surface water. All of those opportunities are available. So John, to put your heart at ease, we're not taking any salt water out of the lake. We've got other places to get it, and we're very satisfied that we've got the water we need to put together this very efficient paper operation. Power sources in the old days were all based on on-site biomass boilers and black liquor boilers and recovery boilers, all those things that would drive the energy needed to make paper. Today, we're looking at a mix of natural gas and the local grid, even exploring alternative energy sources. So all of those possibilities put us in a place where we're not as driven by the need to use biomass and other of the large coal requirements that you saw in the eastern United States. Mentioned the location, we're looking at suburban and semi-rural locations rather than the remote locations that were prominent in years past. The forestry impact, I come out of a very sustainable forestry-driven industry where companies have put in place excellent systems to reforest and manage the forests that they use. I will tell you very proudly that one of the first mills I ever was a part of planted pine trees for 20 years before they started up their first paper machine because they knew the need they had for developing the forest base. Now, on the other hand, in our location, we won't be able to use a tree. We won't harvest a single tree in support of our mill. In fact, if you brought me a tree, I wouldn't even have the right equipment on site to process it and turn it into pulp. We are a 100% recycled paper operation, and that is following a global trend. I've traveled in support of this project, a couple of continents looking at different recycling operations to see how people are deploying technology today. And the leading global technology for packaging paper is recycled OCC. In terms of smell, which is always a question with paper mills, the beauty of a recycled operation is it doesn't require sulfur dioxide. The sulfur dioxide is used in a pulp digesting operation to loosen the fibers from the wood chips that are introduced into the digester. Because we won't digest, we won't use sulfur dioxide, and the smell derived from that is therefore eliminated from our process. And that's true of recycled mills located around the country. It's why you can have a recycled mill in Ontario, California. It's why you can have a recycled mill in Forney, Texas. It's all of these locations that make it that make it possible. And again, I mentioned briefly transportation on a previous slide. Mills like ours are located around the world in all of these places that serve their local box makers with materials derived from local recycled operations. And so you can see we're in many ways we're following a very well-worn path. We are going after a market that has a need, but we're using technology that's state-of-the-art and following a template that has been very well used in many other locations around the country and around the world. Very quickly, this is what the business end of a paper machine looks like. We will be employing a mini mill concept, keeping ourselves in that 320 to 340,000 ton per year output range. That is smaller than some of the large, massive virgin mills that operate in states like Georgia and Alabama. But it is appropriately targeted for the market that we're going to serve in the Western United States. I'll leave some of the details, to the side here in terms of machine speeds and the like. But the critical thing to understand is that we're designing the machine so that the basis weight profile, the thickness and strength of the paper, is targeted on lighter weights and high performance paper grades. We need to produce greater resistance and strength of box while using less fiber in each production run. That gives us the more efficient use of the available resource, and that's where we're going to find our greatest success. We have gone through our phase 1 engineering. It's complete. Our phase 2 engineering and phase 3 steps are well underway, and we're excited to say that in the next short window we'll be completed with those, and that will give us a complete construction and machine build plan that we'll move forward with. And we've got the support of global experts, both from Fisher International on the market side and Yates Engineering out of Birmingham, Alabama on the production side. We're very confident that our raw material supply is in great shape. We have an agreement with Cellmark out of Novato, California, also their sister company in Gothenburg, Sweden, one of the large global players in the fiber world, and then supplemental agreements with other recyclers as we work to furnish the mill in all of its requirements. We're fortunate to have the backing of Credit Suisse out of their New York City location, one of the largest global players in infrastructure development, and they will be leading our financial backing with both syndicated lending and additional equity as we roll forward. Now, with that, I've left some time for Q&A, and I know that we had some questions perhaps from the earlier presentation from Eric. But again, we're here and excited to get this project moving even further down its timeline. We anticipate that we will be operating in a very short window and being able to again provide this Western United States market with global scale, more efficient technology, and a much needed output to supply the industry in California, industry in Utah, Nevada, all of those Western states in a way that they have not been supplied up until now.
Ron, thank you. It's great. It's really refreshing to hear the perspective that you have in addition to Eric's perspective. So we have, someone coming out of the paper and packaging background and someone with a strong background strictly in recycling. So let's open up for some questions. Frank, I think we have some time to let people, the idea is to raise your hand in the chat box.
Right. And yeah, we have about 10 minutes before our next presentation, but I just want to remind everyone, if you could just sign in at the chat box with your name, organization, and your email. That way we can get you any information that may come out of this very quickly. Thank you, John.
And Ron, would you stop sharing your screen?
I'm doing that. You bet.
Perfect.
See, it's that LA Dodger thing, See, Ron, I know.
Okay, so I saw Eddie had a question, but let me about the projected start date for each project. So Ron and Eric.
Eddie?
Sure, I'll go first. I'm still off mute. Our anticipation is that we have about a 26-month construction build out ahead of us. So that would put us starting the mill in late 2022. That's our target, and if we can get some paper made in the back half of 2022, that'll be great news for us.
Yeah, with respect to the Chesapeake facility, the engineering work, all the preliminary engineering work is done, and we're now in the process of closing on the bonds, the tax exempt bonds that I mentioned. So we have an EPC contractor that's now been released, and expect the bonds to be sold right at the first of the year. And then we'll then make, orders for equipment and everything else. So we've really got, we won't make it in 2021, but we're at this point, first quarter of 2022, expect to be producing pulp.
Great. Let me ask each of you about the role that the
related to
mentioned the governor's office.
No.
I think Trish. I'm hearing background.
Well,
so,
I'll be happy to step in and talk a little bit about the role of the government. The state of Utah has been very very helpful and a really good partner in terms of discussing site selection possibilities, state government permitting, state government promotion. We met very early with the Department of Environmental Quality, both on the water and air side, and they have a plan from us regarding permitting. So we've been very fortunate to have very supportive and helpful folks from throughout all levels of state government.
Yeah, I'll echo the same thing as far as our experience in, specifically in Virginia for the Chesapeake site. It was a very easy process. The city and the state worked well together.
You're dropping Sam Game should be not Billy.
There's the two together.
I've got some.
It's actually there.
So we're hearing Trish Christensen. We're hearing you.
Oh, so sorry.
You want to mute? Okay.
So.
Yeah, no, that's so. Again, what we found in Virginia, which is a nice model, is that the economic development at a local level was very well coordinated with the state level, and so I mean, literally, we would just show up, and they would all be there at the same conference room. We would talk through things. They would provide, all of their information, all the contact people, and just say lay out every program and what works, what doesn't work, what's going to fit, what's not going to fit, overlay a timeline on it, and everybody just went to work. I mean, literally, it was that effective. And they kept, because the way they worked in Virginia, everything ends up when it goes to the governor's level, which we did. It's kept in in a top secret world. So we had a project code name and all that stuff. And so when everything was settled and completed, then the governor came out with a nice announcement on the project, and the city announced it, and was all very official in that regard. But I guess the other than the fanfare part of it is that everybody was just very easy to work with and very focused on, what specific things can do. And that didn't mean just everything, but they looked at it as rightfully so, that it was a competition. There were other locations on the East Coast we could have gone to, and they knew what they were, and they basically brought in the resources and said, we want you to be here, makes sense, and what can we do to help make that a reality? And that was really the approach. We've had other conversations we've got really 2 sites in California we're working on. I can't disclose those at this point, but we have been in discussions with Cal Recycle, with the Treasurer's Office, specifically on the tax exempt financing part of it, and they're tracking our projects, and it's been a very good relationship. It's just different. And I think the part that's been brought up before that I think is really, really important is California is very large, and the agencies are, not as coordinated, which I think is part of your, cut the green tape thing. But we have regional agencies and whatnot that have different opinions about things, and I think they just all need to be brought into that same level of discussion, and so that everyone understands what the overall objectives are, and so that we can get that same level of participation and engagement in all the particulars. Because that's where I think where we see on project permitting in California, that's where we see just some real challenges. When I speak regional agencies, air and water being the two big ones. Those are just really a struggle at times. I know you're going to talk about composting in a moment, but we're just finishing a large compost project in the Bay Area that's just getting completed, and getting an authority to construct was not an easy process, right? So those things need, and a lot of it was not because people were not interested in it. I don't want to say it that way. I think Bay Area AQMD did a good job of working with us. There's just not a lot of great data, and there's a lot of differing opinions about things. And so it just takes a very, very long time. And I think that's what, if you're going to cut tape, that's what the issue is time and certainty of outcome. If you do everything and you get a certainty of an outcome, you're willing to do it. If you don't have a certainty of outcome, really tough. The other thing I'm going to say is that we're all talking about greenhouse gas. So the big program from an economic standpoint in greenhouse gas is the LCFS, the low carbon fuel standard. That's where a lot of, there's been a lot of confusion about that. And I have to say that CARB has been working with us specifically on this new design pathway to figure that out, so that we can, basically use one project as an example to get to how does the CI, the carbon intensity, really get scored, right? What are the real technical parameters that get you to what the CI is? Because we've said, look, without certainty of that CI, we have no certainty of what that environmental benefit is, and we can't project to anybody else that this is what it is. And it's a large economic benefit. What's there, you can see it, but you don't really know what it is. No one will let you claim it, right? So certainty was the big parameter around a technical solution. So if we know what our technical issues are, and we know what that means from a regulatory standpoint, and what that means in terms of the overall benefit, the shared benefit for all of us, then things can move forward. But where projects are, like the projects that Ron and I are working on, are highly complicated from a standpoint of completing the commercial elements. There are a lot of pieces to pull together, and someone has to pay for all that before there's really a business, right? And so what happens is the lack of certainty on some of these elements frustrate people, and they just say, forget it. And so frankly, from our perspective, even though we're very, we have a business all over the world, but we obviously know California quite well. We do a lot of great projects in California. But when we looked at this pulping project, we could see that it was going to be far easier to do it somewhere else so we could demonstrate it than trying to do it the first one in California, just because this is all of the issues that we're all talking about. So hopefully that reference site will be obviously very useful as we talk about more projects in the future. Long answer, but hopefully that covers a lot of ground.
A lot of ground. Frank, are we?
We have Patty Moore has her hand up.
Okay, Patty, why don't you unmute and pose your question?
I was just wondering about the mini mill concept, if that mill is going to, is applicable to California, or is it planning on using California as an end market and drawing raw material from California? Or so I guess what I'm asking, is there room for an additional one in the West?
Well, that's a great question. Let me take it in two pieces. Raw material, the paper fiber is a commercially traded commodity. So it may well be that some of the material that's collected and gathered in municipalities and in counties in California may find its way to the location where we'll be operating. I mean, that may well be a very good source of raw material, and could be beneficial to California counties, municipalities who are moving material currently to places that are less productive and less beneficial. So we are absolutely open to California being a source of raw material for the operation. Likewise, we're very open and very excited about the possibility of California box makers being customers of the facility. The Central Valley is a wonderful place that generates so much of the nation's foodstuffs, and those all need to be shipped in corrugated boxes. And as a result, we look at that and feel like that's another likely outcome, that this material will find its way beyond just the Intermountain West, but anywhere that finds a need and doesn't want to import long distance paper shipments from places like Wisconsin and Alabama and South Carolina. So yes, we do see those two markets as those two issues as potential sources and potential offtake partners for the operation. Finally, is there an opportunity in the state of California for additional capacity in paper making? Why, absolutely yes. And it will be up to a combination of entrepreneurial thinkers and the market to help determine where and how that could roll out. But I will tell you, Patty, you're not the first person to ask me about putting a mill in California. In fact, I think that might have been the first thing out of Frank's mouth when he called me. So we've talked about it, and our eyes are all over the Western U.S. for where the next opportunity might lie.
All right. Well, thank you, Ron and Eric, and thank you, especially Ron, for mentioning the Dodgers. I didn't want to harp on that, but you do have to ask, if God weren't a baseball fan, why is the sky Dodger blue? Especially today. Alex Oseguera, I think you're next. So.
Thank you, John. Been a fan of the Dodgers for a long time, so back to Fernando Valenzuela time. So I was reminded that it has been 32 years since the last World Series win, so quite an accomplishment by the folks. So it was nice to see that. I want to thank, my name is Alex Oseguera. I'm the Director of Government Affairs for Waste Management in California and Hawaii. My experience is mostly in operations. So I've been fortunate to run many facilities, including collection systems, transfers, recycling facilities, as we call them, MRFs, and landfills as well. I want to thank the Greater Stockton Chamber of Commerce, the Green Team of San Joaquin County, obviously, Recycling Bin, and Frank Farrell for the invitation to be one of the moderators today. Before presenting the speakers today, I do have a couple of comments. With the upcoming implementation of SB 1383, I know other speakers have mentioned it, the short-lived climate pollutant law, new recycling market challenges, and upcoming air regulations and rules in the state of California. There is a growing and critical need for permitting, upgrading, and building of new facilities throughout the state. The growing concern is, and I think many folks here on the call have already mentioned, is the increasing time it has taken to permit a facility. I will briefly talk about, the experience that we've had at Waste Management. The previous speaker spoke of taking 24 to 26 months, I believe, was mentioned in terms of starting the construction and finishing a facility. But whether it's 24 months, 36 months, 48 months. I think that industry, whether it's the recycling industry, the industry building compost facilities for organics management, or facilities that are building a pulp facility, or other type of infrastructure that is needed to make sure that we have what's needed here in the state of California, needs certainty or additional certainty. What we've experienced as we have permitted compost facilities or some of our cast facilities, organic facilities, and many other facilities that the permit process is taking longer and longer. We wish it was just 24 or 36 months. We have some facilities that it has taken 11 years. There's facilities that should have taken 3 years that took 8 to 9 years. And I know of one permit recently that we received that took 23 years to get. And so I believe there is a critical need for a process to ensure that there is certainty in the marketplace. So if someone wants to permit a facility, they understand what those timelines look like. It is not an effort, an effort to circumvent regulation or the process or the permitting process. Quite the contrary. It's to understand how to go through the permitting process, making sure that you understand what the different parameters are, but also that you know that there is an end date to where you can begin to offer the services that those facilities are to offer. Specifically, here the speakers will talk about the organic facilities. With SB 1383, there will be a significant increase in the volume of organic materials that are collected and that are diverted from landfilling. And so there needs to be facilities ready, prepared to process those materials. And we are concerned that if these facilities take so long, that we will have a critical and large bottleneck in the process. And so those are the experience that we've had at Waste Management. We also believe that there is a need for coordination and for assistance to make sure that the process, once again, provides certainty. So there'll be two speakers that will be presenting today. The first one will be Neil Edgar. He's a senior project manager at Edgar and Associates. And then Paul Miller will be presenting. He's the environmental services principal at RCH Group. So without any further ado, let me present Neil Edgar. Hey, Neil, you're out there, and he'll be presenting on organic facilities. Neil, sorry.
Thanks, Alex. Let me. All right, great to be here, and I want to thanks a lot to Frank, and then I also wanted to thank Heidi and all the work that the Recycling Commission is doing. I'm overwhelmed and fatigued by it, and I'm just a spectator. The work that the number of subcommittees and the commission are doing is monumental, but definitely needed on a large scale. And looking forward to working with our new ally, Undersecretary McElwain. Great to hear her comments and enthusiasm for Cali EPA to try to help move forward as we develop infrastructure. I'm going to talk a lot about a lot of issues on facility siting, regulatory, cost considerations for infrastructure development. I gave this presentation to the Organics Committee. I got some feedback that it sounded like I was there was no point in us moving forward on trying to site facilities. It's just all too overwhelming. And I hope that's not the message I deliver. I'm more interested in identifying the challenges. Why is a consolidated permitting important? Because there are a number of issues beyond just the permitting part of the equation. As Eric Herbert mentioned earlier, you're coordinating a rather complex process in order to get the facilities developed. and there are a number of issues to consider. So I'll give a little introduction of what I do besides working with Edgar and Associates, the policy drivers, briefly, compost facility siting considerations, the regulatory challenges, compost processes and technologies, other organics management technologies, talk a little bit about the cost differences and what the market challenges are before I pass it off to Paul. California Compost Coalition is a lobbying coalition, work on policy, both legislatively and regulatory policy. I'm the executive director. That takes up about half of my time and keeps me abreast of all of the policy issues that are affecting organics processing throughout the state and across the country. I'm also the chair of the Legislative and Environmental Affairs Committee for the U.S. Composting Council. And a lot of the same issues that California is facing are being mimicked across the country. But they have unique solutions to a lot of these issues that I think would be helpful in bringing those back to California in some ways and vice versa. Policy drivers, this has been a long road. I mean, from AB 939, most of the jurisdictions across the state, when they were faced with these mandates for landfill diversion, opted to go in the direction of recycling. A few of them also added in an organics component to that. And there is some infrastructure that was developed through that process, but by and large, the organics equation was neglected by a number of jurisdictions, and in particular in Southern California, although I would say that Bakersfield, the city of Bakersfield is a notable exception in that they developed a composting facility in response to AB 939 and were able to achieve their goals, I think, a little bit faster, as organic materials tend to be large in volume and heavy in weight. But the organics processing infrastructure really has been ramping up since policy-wise since AB 32 and addressing climate change became more important. And so we've seen a lot of legislative activity, but note that most of it's taken place over the last 6 or so years. This process that we're addressing now, cutting the green tape, was something that SB 1045 was supposed to be undertaking. I think it's AB 1045. But in any event, it was designed to help provide some leadership from the state on cross-pollinating, cross-coordination between the regulatory agencies and providing a methodology for that coordination in order to help facilitate infrastructure for organics processing. The first step of that is the report that the Cal EPA issued a couple of years ago now. Hopefully this is going to be the second step where there are actual practical steps taken to move forward on getting infrastructure on the ground and coordinating between the local levels and the regulatory agencies at the state level. So there are a number of challenges, and I characterize some of them as regulatory challenges, although some of them might be more characterized as market issues. And anyways, there are land-based issues like local land use and CEQA and market access, water issues, the compost general order that the state board issued 5 years ago, stormwater permits, air quality issues with air district rules in 2 air districts, and then the Bay Area AQMD is moving forward with rulemaking now, and then new source review. I'll talk a little bit more about all of these. Local land use is challenged by NIMBYs, NOPE, bananas, so not on planet Earth, build absolutely nothing by anywhere near anybody or anything. Those are the types of challenges that facility developers run up against in all types of projects. CEQA is a challenge, in particular with composting operations, traffic concerns, biological resources, cultural resources, which seem to be more prevalent in Southern California projects, and noise considerations. Zoning is an issue, and there are a handful of jurisdictions across the state that actually have zoning code language that pertains to composting facilities. By far the large percentage do not. And I would challenge all of the local government folks across the state to start looking at their zoning code and coming up with language that will help facilitate the development of the infrastructure that is going to serve them to meet the lofty goals of SB 1383. Prime farmland's another consideration. Very difficult to take prime farmland out of production. And even though composting is ancillary to farming and agriculture, there is a lot of resistance to that. And sometimes that involves Williamson Act, removing properties from Williamson Act, that there are some cost considerations that go along with that, and some resistance from counties. The U.S. Composting Council is about to wrap up a model zoning ordinance to try to help provide some guidance for jurisdictions across the country on how to help site community, commercial, or on-farm composting operations. We're working with the American Planning Association and a number of folks on in order to professionalize the language that we've already developed, and this should be out within the next month or so. There are also regulations related to solid waste facilities and compostable materials handling regulations, which were updated a few years ago, or another challenge to developing and operating facilities. And the solid waste fee structure, it's still a lot cheaper throughout most of the state to landfill materials than it is to compost them or otherwise process organics. And that's a disincentive to moving forward on infrastructure. Water-related issues, the State Water Board has developed their compost general order, general waste discharge requirements that are designed to protect groundwater. They also have some pretty significant requirements for wastewater retention, treatment and disposal, and monitoring and reporting. And while they are challenging from a facility development standpoint, they are pretty concrete. We know what they are. Getting through the permitting process is relatively simple compared to other opportunities that I'll talk about, and then but they do cost quite a bit. So putting in line ponds and line ditches and having impermeable pads are a challenge. So where you site your facility, the soil type may or may not be suitable for developing a facility just on the ground itself. There are permeability considerations that need to be taken up. If the facility is going to be located in a flood zone, there may be limitations to what you can do or additional cost to mitigating those flood concerns. The depth of groundwater is a consideration, and surface water considerations, including how close your facility operations will be to local wells or to surface water bodies. There is also the State Water Board industrial stormwater permit that operators need to still comply with. So essentially, it's one thing to develop your facility in compliance with the compost general order. You also are limited in what you can discharge from your facility, and that it needs to meet the industrial stormwater permit. And so adding in this type of a lined pond and water treatment equipment is going to be more and more prevalent and does not come without considerable cost. Local air districts are probably the largest challenge outside of the CEQA and land use approval process. And again, this speaks to the challenges of not having any sort of coordination between the higher levels of the state government and the permitting processes that occur under their purview, and the local land use approvals, the counties, cities, and local air districts who have their own autonomy and are challenged with producing cleaner air in accordance with the Clean Air Act. And so getting facilities on the ground means that you're going to be concerned with criteria pollutants and ozone non-attainment. A number of air districts across the state are in non-attainment for ozone. If you're building a new facility, you're likely to have to undergo new source review, which is a fairly lengthy process and requires health risk assessments and likely the purchase of offsets. And there are emissions reductions credit scarcity across the state. Most of the air districts in the state don't have ERCs available to purchase even if you needed to. So getting past this type of challenge is going to be considerable to get enough infrastructure across the state. Rule 4566 in San Joaquin Valley has been in place for nearly 10 years, along with the revision of 1133.3 in South Coast. Both of those present their own operating challenges to meet the requirements in those airsheds. And then you have AB 32 and greenhouse gas considerations. All projects under CEQA, and Paul will talk about this, I'm sure, are required to mitigate greenhouse gas impacts. The fortunate part for composting operations and other organics diversion facilities is they are a solution to limiting landfill methane emissions. And so there's some credit that can be had by doing a calculation of what the benefits are of your project in relation to that landfill methane avoidance. And new on the scene is this AB 617 community air protection and toxic emission inventory regulations that are matriculating now. There has been toxic hotspots emission inventory in place under AB 2588 for a considerable amount of time, but the AB 617 ratcheted up some of the requirements, and so active facilities now are undergoing a toxic emission inventory plan process and toxic emissions inventory reports. And of course, odors are always a concern. We'll talk a little bit about the types of technologies that are in the marketplace, and in many cases, the options I show you are going to be the windrows are not as going to be a part of the future as much. They're very difficult to permit under the water board and air regulations. Talk a little bit about anaerobic digestion and the difference between wet and dry, depackaging equipment, animal feed, and then wood waste, biomass gasification. Windrows are the traditional method of composting, and out of the 180 or so facilities in the state, I think roughly 160 of them, 170 of them are still windrow facilities and are actively turned by a turner. Newer technologies are being employed across the country. This facility on the right here is in Florida. It's been in place for about 5 years. Waste Management built it to service the Orlando community, and in particular resort communities that were interested in reducing their carbon footprint and reducing their environmental impact. And so it's a market-driven solution. Notice the concrete bunkers and a batch process, and then it's negative aeration, which is vented through these biofilters on the right here. This is a similar sort of technology application with fabric covers that are breathable, and those aeration vents at the ends along the wall here draw air through the fabric and through the materials and into these biofilters to reduce air emissions. Air raid static pile technology is not new. It's been in place and employed. And the top right here is a facility in Kelowna, British Columbia that's been in place for about 15 years or so, but that technology has been employed in the wastewater treatment and biosolids treatment world for many years. It's fairly costly, and now it's moving to into our world in solid waste and organics management. This facility in St. Helena has been using this type of blower system with a finished compost cover over the top of it for a couple of decades. And then this type of bagged process is similar to what's used at Z-Best composting down in Gilroy, where you're bagging the materials and using a blower to force air through it. This facility, this type of technology is part of a new technology very similar to the bunkered facility I showed you earlier in Florida. This design is being employed both in Napa, where a new facility is just opened at the beginning of this year. It handles about 65,000 tons a day, and the composting operations portion of it is about a $10.5 million investment. Very similar facility down in Victorville, 60,000 tons a year, but the cost of developing and building the facility was considerably less given the cost of doing business, the local materials that were available, and the local processors that were used to develop the aeration equipment. This type of technology is a gore system. These are fabric covers like the ones I showed before, where you're using positive air to force air up through the materials. And these covers, which are Gore-Tex, are capable of filtering out a lot of the emissions that would otherwise pollute the air. And this facility in Kerman, Mid-Valley Compost, is opened last year. Handles about 60,000 tons a year and costs about $7.5 million. You can go into more expensive technologies like these little boxes and these vaults. These are typically employed in situation and locales where you may be weather impacted. So I believe these boxes are located in Frisco, or I think in Frisco, Colorado. So they're at altitude. They're impacted by winter weather, and so to be able to continue their composting process throughout the winter, they need to have these fully enclosed type of systems, which are considerably more costly. This rotating drum technology has been around for several decades. It's now being employed in a number of facilities, mainly for pre-processing. So I believe there's a couple of very large versions of this technology employed at the waste management facility in San Leandro. It's used to manage materials that are commingled with packaging, and it helps dry out the materials and as it runs through the process and separate out the organic fractions from the packaging. Wet anaerobic digestion is similar to what you see at wastewater treatment plants, which is down here on the lower left. These digesters are on a dairy in New York, and this is a facility in northern Sacramento that was a pilot scale project that was up and running for a couple of years but is now closed down. But these type of technologies are excellent for managing wet slurry type of organics, but not so handy in managing bulky materials like green waste. This type of an anaerobic digestion system is similar to what Z-Wed and Eric Herbert have built down in San Jose with vaults, and where they're loaded with a typical loader, and this is again, a pilot scale version of that. These types of facilities can run between $50 and $100 million. They manage about 80 to 90,000 tons. So you can, if you do the math, 100 million over 90,000, you can get an excellent idea of what the cost is. These are more and more prevalent. So as as food waste programs have been developed, most of the jurisdictions, or a number of jurisdictions in the state, and a number of companies have started to use compostable packaging, which in many cases is not able to be discerned from non-compostable packaging and leads to a lot of contamination issues for composting operators. They begin to pre-process the materials through this type of a depackaging unit, which means that the compostable packaging in collection programs is a moot point. You really don't, there's no point in having compostable packaging if your end game is to filter it out. And typically compostable packaging costs a premium, 33 to 40% more than conventional packaging. And if this is going to be part of your pre-processing solution, there's no point in having compostable packaging. This type of unit is roughly about $750,000, but it needs to be mostly it needs to be installed within a building, and that doesn't include the cost of the building. And then there's animal feed processing. Again, this is a similar type of process to the depackaging unit. It puts materials, the organic materials, through a press. In order to remove the organic fraction, you end up with a slurry that looks like this, and then that slurry can either be taken to a wet digester at a wastewater treatment plant. It can be anaerobically digested at a dry facility as well, and it can also be used as animal feed. And this company Safe has a drying process that helps pelletize this material into a basic staple that looks like dog food, and can be used in a variety of animal feed applications. And then biomass gasification, for many who don't know, large biomass plants in California have dwindled over the last several years, given air quality concerns and market pressure from renewable energy sources. It costs roughly 12 to 15 cents a kilowatt to produce energy through a conventional biomass plant, and the solar and wind power is in the 4 to 6 cents range now as technology has improved there. So managing wood waste from as part of your organic waste stream is becoming more and more difficult. A lot of the existing biomass facilities are now being funded with high hazard forest waste in order to help move those woody materials out of the forest. There's funding to do that, but that crowds out a lot of the urban derived waste from construction and demolition debris processing, et cetera. This is a on-site local solution where the energy that's being produced by this plant can be used on-site to run the ancillary equipment and get this facility off the grid. Market challenges are, again, something that was discussed before. If you don't have a stable feedstock source, it's difficult to develop infrastructure, especially at the cost that we're talking about. I'm working on a landfill-based composting facility, similar to the concrete box variety that I showed earlier. And that facility has been in development for roughly 7 years, and it'll cost a little bit more than $30 million when it's complete. So having a well-established feedstock source that you can count on with a tip fee that's going to help you develop a revenue model that works is a challenge, and there are a number of competitors out in the market that are looking for feedstock as well. So it doesn't get easier, although there are abundant tons of material that we're going to be required to divert. There are a lot of opportunities to move those materials in other directions. So landfilling is not the only option. It varies in price across the state, and while it's cheaper there, the use of materials as ADC is being largely phased out as diversion credit was eliminated under AB 1594. but moving materials to land application is still a very prevalent practice, mainly in Southern California, but it exists up and down the state. It's much cheaper to do that, and it may be reasonable to do that if the materials are clean and weed-free, pathogen-free, and contaminant-free. But we see a lot of materials that are being moved into this market that don't meet those requirements, and it's difficult to regulate. Composting in windrows is relatively inexpensive. Again, another step up in cost. But as I mentioned before, this type of technology is going to be limited in its use as we move forward to take in food waste and building new facilities that are compliant with air and water regulations. These are the first step up. Again, these aerated static pile types of systems, but they cost about twice as much to run and develop and run as a conventional composting operation. And anaerobic digesters move that up again in cost, and then the digestate that comes out of these operations are typically still not going to need composting. The bulk material that results from the digester is not necessarily, and in rare cases, it's ready to be land applied and used as a fertilizer, but in most cases, it's not, and still needs to be composting. So that's all I have, and I'll pass it off to Mr. Oseguera and Mr. Miller, and be happy to answer questions later.
Thank you very much, Neil. Great presentation. Great overall overview of what's needed, also what the cost and what the current technology has. Gives a tremendous view in terms of what's needed, but also, I think also highlights where the bottlenecks and opportunities are for improvement. So thank you. We'll have a answer question session after our next presentation. The next one is Paul Miller, once again with Environmental Services Principal and working for RCH Group. So Paul, you out there?
Yes, I'm here, Alex. Can you hear me?
I can. Good morning.
Okay, good.
Just a reminder for everyone, if you have not signed in, please do so with your name, your organization, and your email. That would help us out greatly. Thank you.
Okay, Alex, thanks for the introduction. I've been preparing CEQA documents for about 30 years now, and I tried to make use of my experience on each of the projects I work on. Make sure that the environmental documents cover what is needed and also eliminate unnecessary evaluations. I've worked on projects, EIR projects involving MRFs, anaerobic digesters, and composting facilities. Within those projects, I've learned a lot about solid waste, and that's really helpful on the teams for the EIR projects that I work on. As I'll explain in the presentation.
Yeah, everybody. Yeah. I know,
Rodney, we can hear you.
As I'll explain in the presentation, there's a team that gets built in doing the CEQA projects, and there's a niche that I've had in solid waste that I help bring that experience to the team. The first thing when you apply for a compost project at the local level, and that's where Alex has mentioned some big challenges in terms of time that it takes to get the permits. First, there's a project application, and then the next thing is the California Environmental Quality Act. You need to undergo a CEQA review. After that, there are permits that are needed. And those permits can be started in parallel track. Air quality, water, solid waste, other permits may be required as well. In California, under the CEQA guidelines, it's not an easy or predictable process. Do your homework and be prepared. Hopefully you can build the team. And now at this point, I did want to sort of reach out to the team, the great Dodger team that we saw recently win their first title in 32 years, and kudos to them. I would like to mention that the Giants had some success earlier in this decade. I got to do a tour in Lodi where they had 3 recent trophies down there. So still, congratulations to the Dodgers on their trophy. Getting back to CEQA, CEQA is basically, it's the California Environmental Quality Act, and it's basically the same. Everybody follows the CEQA guidelines. They do it differently in most jurisdictions, but it's similar. The CEQA guidelines shown in this book that gets passed out each year to the Association of Environmental Professionals, a great book to have in your possession if you're doing a project. CEQA is not mentioned once in the guidelines. Recycling's mentioned 4 times in the guidelines. So it's very general, and composting is just not something that's specifically identified in the guidelines. CEQA is a very broad process. It's the backbone of the state's environmental protection, requires governmental agencies to evaluate and consider the impacts. It has important ramifications for both public entities and the private sector. And it provides for public involvement. And I should also say it involves for legal interactions by project opponents, and also there are various unions that get very involved in the CEQA process, usually slowing down the process until they're satisfied with potential for a project labor agreement. The basic purposes of CEQA are to inform, to engage the public, to disclose potential impacts on the environment, and after those impacts have been disclosed, to avoid or reduce the potential impacts. The CEQA topics that get reviewed on each of these local projects, well, there's about 20 different topics that gets covered, everything from aesthetics and air quality to wildfires. A lot of information. Now, why is CEQA required for compost projects? Well, Neil Edgar mentioned this previously, that there's probably no commercial composting projects that would be approved by right anywhere in California. There's no rights to build a composting project anyplace, so you need discretionary approval. That approval of the city or county will probably be in the form of a discretionary action for a conditional use permit, zoning change, and potentially a general plan amendment. Final approval before the city or county decision-making board will be required. A majority of the votes will be needed to approve a project and complete the CEQA process. What type of CEQA document would you need for most of these composting projects? A categorical exemption is unlikely. Mitigated negative declaration is the next level of CEQA review. And if you have a really good site, the project could qualify for a mitigated neg deck. And then finally, if there's a potential for significant impacts, you need to do an environmental impact report, which can become a long and fairly tedious process. The CEQA flow chart, this is out of the CEQA book that I showed earlier, and it shows not a project, you can be exempt, but to get your negative declaration, runs down this pathway over here, and to do an EIR runs down this side. So there's many steps in the CEQA process regardless of your project pathway. Who is the lead agency for CEQA? So there's one public agency needs to be responsible for preparing the CEQA document, either an EIR or a negative declaration for a project. That's called the lead agency. And the lead agency will determine whether to pursue an EIR or a negative declaration. So that's a lead agency decision. What else does the lead agency do? They assign a lead agency project manager, typically. And the lead agency has a role in assigning a CEQA consulting company to prepare the negative declaration or EIR. Most lead agencies don't have the capacity in-house to do the CEQA project themselves, so there needs to be a CEQA consulting company, like the company I work in, that prepares the negative declarations or EIRs. This is a very interesting point of the process because this is done differently in the various lead agencies around the state. Some lead agencies allow the project developer to find a CEQA consulting company that can prepare these documents, and they have to be vetted by the lead agency. Sometimes the lead agency will have a list of on-call contractors, and they'll allow the developer to receive proposals from those various on-call contractors. But you're never quite sure. A couple things on this page. You're not sure when you start the project who the lead agency project manager will be and who the CEQA consulting company preparing the document will be. And my final point here is you may not want to casually accept these two assignments from the lead agency. This is what I say about building the team to get your project through the process successfully. These are a couple steps that are very important in that process. Who was on the CEQA team? So you've got an applicant and a sponsor. The lead agency has a project manager, the CEQA consultant, and the decision-making body. Now, the majority of the work is done by these first three parties, the applicant, the lead agency, and the CEQA consultant, sort of working together. Some jurisdictions allow more interaction between the applicant and the consultants than others. Sometimes it is just the lead agency and the consultant, and the applicant is off to the side to provide responses to data requests, but not much more than that. And I prefer the jurisdictions that allow more applicant interaction because the applicant understands the project. It's the applicant's project. They understand what they're trying to do. And in many cases, the lead agency, CEQA project manager, and the CEQA consultant may not know much about composting. If we talk about composting, if it would be paper pulping project. We're pretty sure that the CEQA project manager and the CEQA consultant would know very little about paper pulping projects in California. Not many new projects built there, and if your jurisdiction has built one, they probably won't need another one in that location. Who is the most important? Who is most important on the CEQA team? Well, you know, I have to think everybody's important on the CEQA team here that you're building. You need to build a great team. Like we've talked about the Dodgers and Giants, it's a complete team effort. Everybody needs to be working together. There's the applicant that has to come up with the right project concept to begin with. Lead agency, as I mentioned here, it could be their first CEQA project, let alone their first compost project, but your project could get assigned to CEQA project manager that it's their first ever CEQA project. That would not be a good thing. You should work ahead, do your homework, and reach out to the lead agency to make sure that you're going to get a CEQA project manager from the lead agency that's appropriate for the complexity of the project that you are applying for. In the CEQA consultant, as I mentioned before, there are many choices there, and the applicant can have some choice in about 50% of the time. The other 50% of the time, the CEQA consultant is pretty much assigned to your project by the lead agency. They coordinate with the lead agency to prepare the CEQA document. And finally, the decision-making body. When you get to the end of the CEQA project, you're going to need a majority of the votes on the city council or the board of supervisors. So it's important that the applicant reach out to these elected officials and let them know why it's a good project. And that should start before the CEQA document gets to them at the final moment. What can the applicant do? The applicant may be the only team member that knows anything about composting. Now that's a scary thought when you've got a big important project that you're moving forward. But in this team situation, the applicant may be the only composting expert on the team. Do the background studies necessary for CEQA. All those environmental topics I showed on the earlier slide, air quality, biology, cultural resources, the applicant may want to start those in advance and understand the background studies that will be needed for CEQA. Find a great site. Have a project worth fighting for. Finances have to work. If your project doesn't pencil out at the end, you shouldn't be in the CEQA project to begin with. Find a jurisdiction that wants and needs composting. Seek the best lead agency project manager. Seek the best CEQA consultant. If you have those things on your team, you have a much higher probability of success of getting the CEQA document approved by the decision-making body. What can the applicant do? More on that list. Provide evaluations for air quality. Neil mentioned this earlier. VOC emissions are complicated in California, and there's minimal data on the emissions, and it's important to get the best data possible moving forward into the process to help out the project manager for the lead agency and also the CEQA environmental team. The same can be said for odors, also a problem. Partner with the city and county. Is there any opportunity? And I've sort of put forth this presentation as if there's a private development coming forward, but if it's a city project to do composting and the city's bringing in a compost team, that's a partnership between the city and the composting experts, and CEQA should be easier under that situation. The public need would be more understood because the lead agency has indicated that they need a CEQA or need a compost project. And that's why they've reached out to a composting partner. So that's a much better situation if you're partnering in some way with the local jurisdiction. Promote the project objectives. We've heard a lot of this today. Why landfill diversion of organics? Very important. We don't want the organics going into the landfill. They have value. So this is one of the ways that organics has value. Also, your project can promote countywide solutions to commercial composting. It can provide high quality compost products that will support agricultural users. There's agricultural users throughout California, so that can be true in almost every county in the state. And composting can minimize potential negative environmental effects of the project through design features and operational best management practices. Also emphasize the requirement by CalRecycle for in your solid waste facility permit, you'll need an odor impact minimization plan, the OIP, and you should make that very clear from the beginning how the OIP would be drawn up and put together, what the conditions. So the odor impact minimization plan, it would, some of these steps are similar for almost all projects, processing any particularly odorous materials or loads as soon as possible. Monitor the weather conditions. Careful management of the composting process, including maintaining proper temperature, oxygen, nitrogen, and moisture levels. Very important so that the composting does not turn anaerobic and create odor problems. And finally, just general good housekeeping practices to keep the site clean. All those are helpful in odor control. One thing I wanted to mention, one very interesting nuance about CEQA and composting facilities now is that the state changed how they view traffic. As of July 1st, 2020, traffic congestion is no longer a CEQA environmental impact. Hooray! It can be an impact to the public, but it's not CEQA environmental impact, and there can be great reduction in CEQA documents, shorter and less expensive because the traffic reports in many cases can be greatly minimized or eliminated. Trucks don't count in vehicle miles traveled. So it's only the VMT considerations are only for passenger vehicles. So that can be helpful for many solid waste types of projects and compost and recycling projects because the trucks don't count. And jurisdictions are still determining what to do. Each jurisdiction needs to determine how they're going to implement vehicle miles traveled, the VMT procedures into their CEQA documents, and that's still ongoing in almost all jurisdictions. Some of the larger jurisdictions have solved that problem. Finished compost, and I'm finished now with my presentation. Thank you, and good luck on your compost projects and getting through the CEQA process.
Paul and Neil, want to thank both of you. I mean, just great presentations. I think that very well highlight the challenging issues of permitting a facility and what needs to happen. I'd like to add to a bit to Paul's presentation, and you throw on top of that there's sometimes changing regulators, right? Someone gets promoted, someone leaves, someone retires, and sometimes you start completely new. It's not the process all new, but the next person is reinterpreting what someone said and might put different conditions, and all of a sudden now you're delayed even more. So I think excellent presentation, Paul, in terms of really going through that. And I think Neil showed all the facilities and what also are the challenges there. So I think it really provides the audience a really good viewpoint into the challenges here in California. Now opening up for questions out there. Paul and Neil are ready, and I know I have two on my own for them, but anyone out there that would like to ask a question to Paul or to Neil?
Let me start it off, Alex. Just from point A to point Z, one of the things this BIN Summit is all about is to provide recommendations for the commission to what can be done to make it timeline shorter to get compost facilities online in California. From what Paul was saying, and from what you started with, Alex, was it could be anywhere from 3 years to 11 to get the permits that you need. So, but consistency, certainty is what businesses need out there to start facilities. So what the goal is to try to get that timeline down, let's say, to 48 months from point A to point Z. Is that doable? And that's open to any of you three.
I'll start with that. Since we do permitting across multiple regulatory agencies, there are CalRecycle's process for solid waste facility permitting is definitely the easiest process because it has well-defined statutory deadlines. So 30 days to get a complete and correct determination, 60 days for the local environmental health folks to write the permit, and then CalRecycle has 60 days to concur. So that 150-day process is well defined and helps facilitate that part of the equation. We don't have those kinds of deadlines with air districts, water board, with the CEQA and land use permitting processes. So absent some sort of well-defined timelines and getting those other entities moving projects through the pipeline faster is critical to trying to reduce the amount of burden on the project developers to get projects approved in a timely manner.
Well, John Davis, Permit Streamlining Act, it's been around since when, 97, and then updated in 2015. Why doesn't that consolidated at the state level, some of these larger agencies?
Yeah, there are similar to what Neil just mentioned. There are timeframes for submitting material, getting review of material, moving through the process. As we know, one of the unfortunate things, we don't know how those timeframes work. We have yet to identify a project that even entered the process. And but what's really important, I think, from what particularly what Neil just mentioned, is that the consolidated permit process allows Cal EPA to bring the local air district and the water board into the discussion. It's not just the state level air resources board and statewide water board, but the locals as well, and bring them into the process under those same timeframes. So I think that's what drew us to looking at that consolidated permit process as maybe a way to rationalize things. The CEQA process, the local land use process, there is a local permit streamlining act that applies to jurisdictions. As Paul mentioned, the CEQA process can kind of mushroom depending on how controversial a project begins. But, you know, people like Frank and I who work with recycling market development zones, Manuel Medrano, I know is on there, Michael Woodsider, we're used to helping through the steps. And if it requires a general plan amendment, that's going to add time. If you go into a properly zoned site in a community that provides for the facility that you're bringing forward, not so much an issue. So, you know, finding the right site, I think, is important, as Paul said. If you have a good site, things can move a lot faster. If you're going in on a residential site owned by somebody's brother-in-law and you think it'd make a good project, it's probably going to be a longer haul.
Yeah, well, you know, it's our initial conversations that this Permit Streamlining Act hasn't been really utilized in the past. And I know, Neil, you were telling me that, you know, there's about 150 facilities are needed in California. Every jurisdiction is mandated through 1383, correct, for green waste and organic collection. So at some point, there's a crossroad that, you know, you're mandating this, but we need to build the facilities. So one suggestion was saying maybe have a public-private partnership on public land. You know, as John, you were saying, it's a mutual public benefit to have these facilities. Remember we were talking about that? John?
Yeah, again, I think the site's important. There are, you know, certainly the Victorville project that Neil showed, the compost facility in Victorville is at a wastewater treatment plant. It's on excess land at a wastewater treatment plant. So, yeah, that, and Paul mentioned too, once the agency recognizes the importance of the project, then you know, you begin to get a different view of the project. They still have to exercise their discretionary authority and go through the CEQA steps, but the buy-in helps a lot. And I think 1383 has a whole series of steps that if a city or county has not secured adequate organics management capacity, they have to go through steps to identify sites, including sites within that jurisdiction. So.
Right. Thank you. Go ahead, Mr. Oscara. It's yours. I'm sorry, I had to get that off my chest.
No, I think great questions, Frank. I mean, I think it's important. As I think, as Heidi mentioned, a lot of input from different folks is important in terms of this dialogue. You know, I think my question was going to be in your line, but I think you posed the question already in terms of how long should it take, whether it's 24 months, 36 months, 48 months, right? But I think that you highlight something very important, Frank. It's the certainty, right? If it's 36 months, I think everyone understands if it takes 2 more months or 6 more months, right? If it's 48 months and it takes another 6 months because of this challenge or that challenge, perfect, right? The problem happens when it's 48 months and it turns into 10 years, right? Worst, when it should take 24 months or 36 months and it turns into 9, 10 years. Then I think decision makers, you know, in terms of investments, start saying, well, do we want to invest in California? Or can we? We want to, but can the project, you know, really be realistic? I mean, a presenter here said, well, let's do it in another state to prove out the concept so that maybe later we can do California. It'd be great if that wasn't even a question, right? It'd be, no, we're going to do California. That's where we should put our facility. But to Paul or Neil, you know, I think my question will be, you know, if you could pick in terms of what you presented, what is the most critical item, hurdle, bottleneck that you see in terms of permitting facilities, going through the permit process? Just what you have experienced. What would you say would be that critical item, hurdle, bottleneck that needs the assistance by the state and by others to get that improved?
Well, I'll start off and let Paul weigh in, but local land use and CEQA are monumental. Most of the local planning staff don't understand composting projects. Well, like Paul said earlier about paper pulp mills, if you built one, you probably don't need another one. So most of the 478 jurisdictions across the state don't have any planning experience with getting the projects developed and on the ground. So some sort of CEQA guidance and, again, model zoning ordinances so that local governments can start making progressive changes to their local policies that will actually help them site infrastructure instead of be a barrier to siting infrastructure, which is where it mainly has been. And then air district permitting it just depends on which of the 35 air districts you're going to be located in the state. But again, they don't have much experience. And to be frank, there's not a lot of available information. We're developing more information about VOC emissions all the time. And Cal Recycle is undertaking a VOC emissions study right now. So that kind of work is going to be helpful in getting the local air districts to better understand what the emissions impacts of a project managing organics is likely to be, and could help facilitate getting the air permits in place. In the Bay Area, we worked on permitting that facility in Napa for about 6.5 years. A little bit of that was on the project developer because the project changed slightly, but most of the time was waiting for air district staff to get a review almost every available piece of information about what the emissions of the facility are expected to be, and then develop some sort of permitting conditions which would limit that potential impact on the community. So those two are the major hurdles, and I'm sure Paul and they are married together because you can address a lot of your air permitting concerns during the CEQA process and should if you get the local air district engaged when that project is going through that CEQA process. Anything to add, Paul?
At the local level, I think it's that team that needs to be built. I mean, that's the biggest hurdle, is getting the team to understand that they're an important cog in the overall project approval or disapproval process. But the developer's going to want to move towards a decision sooner rather than later. So keeping things moving. And there are not a lot of triggers to make lead agencies keep moving forward on projects. CEQA can bog down. I mean, and if you've seen numerous CEQA documents, Alex, you know, those are 400, 600 page documents. And my gosh, there's somebody in the background that's got writer's block and can't figure out how to get the next chapter written. And then when they turn it over to the lead agency, there's somebody that has reviewer's block. They don't know how they're supposed to review this document that's so technical and it's sort of outside their area of expertise. So I think a lot of work needs to be done with the team that's moving forward, as I mentioned in the presentation.
Great comments. I mean, I think that, and I'll open it up for the audience, Frank, but you know, I think, you know, in terms of listening to different speakers, you know, what the themes that come over and over is coordination, assistance with coordination to make sure the different entities are coordinated towards to reach a goal. Right, the team that Paul just mentioned. Is there a team placed together that has the expertise to move it along? And then I think, you know, in terms of Neil, provided an example of, you know, something that's working well at Cal Recycle that really has, here's the process, here's the timelines, and here's what needs to be met, and it moves it forward. So those things very much highlighted by many presentations today. So Frank, over to you for the question asking, if there's someone from the audience.
Yeah, I got one more. I got Steve Lautsy. Steve.
Trying to unmute. There I go. Thanks to everybody. Great show for those of us who love these issues. I guess my question would go to Neil and also is focused back on what recommendations the commission might make. We know that ARB was the driver for AB 32. We know that ARB, the Air Resources Board, was a driver for SB 1383 to get organics out of landfills for the net reduction in GHGs. I think you also said that the air permit is perhaps the biggest obstacle to siting a compost facility. So are there conversations that have taken place between CARB and the air districts about this issue of consistency and coordination, or are there specific recommendations for conversations that should take place on that issue?
To my knowledge, there are ongoing conversations that have occurred over the last several years. There's a waste working group that consists of Cal Recycle, ARB, and other entities within Cal EPA, including Cal EPA staff, that have been contemplating these issues for quite a while and trying to help coordinate. That some of the difficulty is that the local air districts have their own charge, and they're responsible for maintaining criteria pollutant, ozone creation compliance for Clean Air Act, and they don't necessarily have other ARB oversight in that regard, because they're responsible ultimately, and that authority was given to them in statute a couple of decades ago. So they have been, and CAPCOA, the California Air Pollution Control Officers Association, has also been engaged in that process. Their executive director now, Tung Lee, came from ARB and was one of their lead folks in continuing that conversation about cross coordination between the agencies. I just haven't seen where there are relevant solutions. I would say that the programmatic EIR that was done for anaerobic digesters was very helpful in getting projects on the ground, because it was a guidebook for local lead agencies to look at how, what to be expecting on that particular type of project. We have something similar, I think, in the 1383 EIR talking about potential project impacts from composting operations, but it's not as concise and well defined, and maybe a programmatic EIR for composting operations would be helpful in getting more facilities on the ground, because more lead agencies would better understand the process. It would inform a better team at that local level, and could be part of the solution towards getting over that hump. The air district hump is a little bit more complicated, and I think continuing work, and there are a lot of emission studies that are underway at the facilities that are in the Bay Area, for sure. So the Altamont facility, the Napa facility, the two Republic facilities at Newby and West Contra Costa have been required to do some emission study work. So more and more emission study information is becoming available. I don't know if there's somebody who is helping to be a clearinghouse or coordinating entity for that, and maybe ARB could provide that kind of oversight and coordination to assemble the information that's being developed through the facility testing that's going on now.
Hey, Neil, very quickly, just so you know, ARB is on the line today with us. We have the Ombudsman's office is listening to our conversation today.
Awesome.
So I think you just gave a nice invitation, if you will, for that to happen.
Hey, Frank, just a couple thoughts. Because again, the Market Development Committee have been thinking about how to make this happen. One of the advantages of employing that consolidated permit processing in conjunction with the local government people is exactly what I've heard both Paul and Neil mention, that exchange of information and knowledge. The next pulp paper project in California will no doubt be the first one that any local government has had to deal with. The mills that are out there now have been around probably longer than most public employees who might manage that process. So, and these are modern mills; they're new things. everybody's going to be looking at them for the first time. Why not have everybody in the room at the table?
Makes sense.
The information and the knowledge, so we could start with that point. The other thought that came to mind in the CEQA process, there's a requirement to review the greenhouse gas impacts of the project, and organics projects, recycled manufacturing projects have benefits. They're beneficial impacts. It doesn't say just look at the negative impacts. CEQA says look at the impacts. And so I think it's those positive greenhouse gas impacts that aren't fully understood. And I don't know if that balances against, what the air districts have to do on their criteria pollutants. But I think it's a big factor. Serena mentioned, and I'm so glad to hear you use the short-lived climate impact of methane at 85 times carbon dioxide over its natural life. That's a huge reduction to get that material out of landfills. She said landfills are the third largest emitters of methane. There's some evidence from NASA in Jet Propulsion Lab that it's far greater than that. That landfills are in fact the largest source of methane, at least from their flyovers in the States. So, but nonetheless, I think those are a couple things that came to mind as I was listening to it, that we've tried to embed, at least initially, in the market development discussion. That committee, by the way, meets on the first Monday and third Monday. So we meet next Monday, and we're going to be talking about the consolidated permit recommendation specifically at 9 a.m.
Well, if there's not any...
I would add, Frank, that for a specific recommendation, I think having the governor's OPR, issue some guidelines for local governments who are going to be going through a planning process, model zoning ordinances, again, directing them to, some sort of guidance to existing documents that may be helpful in facilitating the process for those local planning folks who are very unfamiliar with these projects generally, is going to also help bridge the gap.
Hey, Neil, is there a template out there that's used or could be used to cite a compost facility? It sounds like anytime someone is looking at citing one, they have to start from scratch.
Well, there are some really good consultants out there that do that kind of work that can help coordinate that process, but it's fairly complex, and it does take a considerable amount of time, more than any of those consultants would ask. And in addressing the kinds of issues that Paul said is because there are no deadlines per se, that projects end up sitting on somebody's desk until they, take up reading through them and providing the comments, and that doesn't help at all, given that you're always going to have people that have a difficult time producing and getting their job done. But the fact that they have it's open-ended and they can take their time to do it makes it a little bit tougher.
Okay.
Yeah, I do want to reiterate what Neil said earlier. In 2010, I was project manager for Cal Recycle on a statewide anaerobic digesters program, EIR, for solid waste. And I think that was very helpful in some of the anaerobic digester projects that did move forward. I know San Luis Obispo County said they looked at that document and they relied on that document for their review of the anaerobic digester there. So, and there's been talk of a statewide compost program, EIR, for some time. It's just never kicked off. And it would be a place that people could start looking how to do the EIR and, just use language and sort of the beneficial impacts of composting could be embedded in parts of that document.
Right. Because I know, every jurisdiction needs to deal with this. And so I guess I just threw a good pitch, a good Dodger pitch, if you will, to the consultants out there. Heidi, why don't we go ahead and forward it to you now? The floor is yours. I know you have a question first.
Yeah.
Go ahead and we'll
question. Okay, thank you. And what a great panel. So I guess my question, I was thinking, since it seems like the local governments, because they deal with these things so very infrequently, they wouldn't have the expertise on staff to review these kinds of more complicated projects, and especially with the technology changes coming so quickly. Is there a way to get state technical assistance? I mean, if it's a priority of the state and a goal of the state to get all these organics out of landfills and get these facilities built, it seems like it would make sense to have an investment at the state level to have somebody on staff that's actually maybe a permit expediter that's expert in these technologies, it's expert in the paperwork and the processes. It could be kind of on loan to jurisdictions that want help to get these facilities approved and built. Neil, does that make any sense, or is there?
I think that would be excellent, and I imagine that there are folks that are pretty well versed in this waste working group that is, you know, a Cal EPA entity, that there could be coordination, or you know, even if, I don't know, even if they went out and hired third-party folks to do the work, there are people out there more outside of just me and Paul. There are a lot of folks who work in this space and understand the issues at many levels and could provide that technical assistance. That's something that the Department of Food and Ag is doing with helping grant writing for some of the healthy soils permits. They're providing technical assistance with third-party consultants to do it if they don't have, you know, they don't have their own internal staff to do that. So if Cal EPA doesn't have somebody to do that, perhaps they would put that out as a, you know, a bid for technical assistance to provide local governments with that kind of service.
Well, one of the thoughts I had was, you know, because we're giving policy advice from the commission, and many of us, you know, do that all the time anyway, but is that we really need to figure out how we're going to take this next step. It just seems like we keep talking about the problems, but we're never getting to the solutions. And if the state is going to come down with mandates, for example, diversion goals or greenhouse gas goals, but there's no plan or support for how to get there, it feels very much like a disposal ban without a plan, as your brother Evan coined the term, no ban without a plan, because it's basically, there's no facility without a plan. And there's no diversion without a plan. And either, you know, the state has to come up with a plan, the locals have to come up with a plan, the companies have to come up with a plan, and then we have to be able to execute it. And it seems to me the problem in California has been we've not been able to execute because of this lack of coordination between the state and the local levels on these permits. And it's, I mean, Alex's comment that it took 23 years to get a permit. If that doesn't scare off business from California, I don't know what will, because that is not certainty and that is not predictable, which is what they need to estimate costs to make these large investments. So I guess, you know, we've heard a lot of things today. The things that I heard were, again, these crazy timelines on how long it takes to get a permit in California. The many reasons why it takes that much time, the lack of coordination, and that other states, according to the, I think it was Ron and Eric that talked about how fast they could get permits in these other states, that they needed certainty. They needed it to be fairly quick because time is money when they're investing in these facilities. And then we have JPAs and all these different groups that may or may not have the expertise, but have to weigh in on these permits in California. We haven't implemented our, you know, Permit Streamlining Act. It seems to me we need some specific takeaways. At this point, we need people to focus on very specific things that gets changes made, because I don't see building infrastructure in California changing much at all if we don't get these barriers out of the way. They're too big and too expensive. I've seen it many, many times, and we're seeing it again with some new facilities. So does anybody have any suggestions that, like, a takeaway from this day, or something that you want to work on and maybe want to work on with other people that have joined us today, to take on a piece of this? And that, you know, would anybody like to, I don't know if you can see the hand raises, Frank.
Well, yeah, just let me just start it off here. I mean, these are both public benefits, both these topics. Benefit to the state of California and every resident in California is to get the composting facilities built, and also to get some paper pulping mills built to divert from the landfill. You want to convert it into product. And that goes right with the bin mission, as well as the Recycling Market Development Zone mission. So, I mean, I'm totally, you guys are all professionals. I'm just looking at this as a frustrated public policy director at the Greater Stockton Chamber of Commerce that says, let's just do it, and then we can talk about it at the end. But it seems to me that a lot of agencies, even on the local level, people are in their little silos, and they really don't want to communicate and coordinate. It's the word that came out of this today for me, with each other for the common good, for everyone. So I like to see the commission, as a recommendation of the commission, that, and it's going to have to be top down. It has to come from the governor's office down, to coordinate these efforts to site these compost facilities. Because as Edgar said, right, there's no plan. I mean, even if you get all the compost generated, made, is it going to be, what are you going to do with it? Who's going to buy it? Who's going to buy the compost? I mean, these are things that have they been fully vetted out? Or is it like an unfunded mandate where the state of California through 1383 mandates to divert all this, but to where? So that I'm just showing a little bit of frustration on my part. But
I think we're all frustrated. That's probably why we're spending 4 hours today trying to figure this out, because I think everybody is feeling like we can do a lot better in California. We're literally, I think, hitting the ceiling on what we can do with diversion if we do not fix these problems. Right. And Neil, one of the commenters, I think Michael, said that he really supports your idea about the statewide programmatic EIR for composting facilities. So these are the things any of you could also make recommendations to the commission that we put in our report. So please do that. If you do have suggestions, these things we discuss at the committee meetings and then bring to the commission for inclusion in our first draft comments, policy advice to the legislature in California January 1st, and then in July of next year. But if it's for legislation, the sooner the better, because they're already talking about which bills they're going to do next year, and they can start introducing as soon as, I think it's December 1st. So we do need to hear from everybody and make sure that we've got a complete list, but we are taking up this in market development. John has got his eye on the permit streamlining, and I'm a very strong proponent. I'm on that committee too. We've got to get 17 commissioners to agree with whatever recommendations are put forward, but and the fact that we have no deadlines for permitting, I mean, that to me is that is a real problem for business.
Yeah.
If we don't put a hard, if you go through this process and you check these boxes, by this date you will have an answer, or a certainty would be check all these boxes for that type of facility and you get a permit by this date. That would be real certainty. And I'm not sure why we can't get there.
Well,
but
that's outlined.
Doing it.
That is outlined in that Permit Streamlining Act. I had certainty, by this date, by this date, by this date. And it's, from what I could tell, it has never been utilized.
Right. So, that would be something the commission could request, that we send somebody to meet with the appropriate people at Cal EPA or at the governor's office of business or some, to start these discussions about why that hasn't been implemented and start down that path of really support, pushing them to do this. And I don't think Serena did discuss that. Maybe I missed it, but I don't think she's on the call anymore because I'd ask if that had been brought up by Cal EPA recently about what's going on. I could follow up with her and ask. I mean, it'd be worth a conversation because I think she got off the call.
Right.
Are there any hands or any other input that people want to put in the chat or that you want to talk about? Because it's not just the commission work, obviously, it's all of us. But I do feel the commission is a good place to start with recommendations.
Yeah, we do have someone who's a consultant with the Assembly Natural Resources Committee. Elizabeth, are you still on? Elizabeth?
Actually pretty shy.
Yeah. Well, I got a list here, so I'm going to call out everybody on the phone today. No, but hey, Greg, are you on? Greg, Ecologic?
I am on.
Hey, Greg, you have a paper pulping facility in Manteca. Can you explain to everyone on the call what exactly you had to go through? I mean, it's a smaller version of a huge plant.
Yeah.
But
it was really curious. I'm sorry I wasn't able to be on the call the entire time. I was kind of coming on and off. I had a couple things I had going on. I'm trying to run a business, but I do have to say that essentially what they're doing in Salt Lake City is what we do on a much smaller scale, in that we take recycled cardboard and recycled newspaper and we put it into a big pulper and we make a slurry that we're making paper bottles out of, and paper jars and a lot of other different products. And the beauty of that system is that we use a very small amount of water. We use municipal water that comes from the city of Manteca, and we're able to reclaim that water through this process. We vacuum it back to the system, and our water bill at our plants, and we have a 60,000 square foot facility, and we produce millions of bottles a month. And in doing that, and having this process take place, we use very little water. So when you're not starting with virgin, wood or virgin fiber, and you're just recycling, you don't have to use the sulfur. You don't have to use all the different materials that paper converters typically have to do. When you're recycling it, it's much smaller footprint, and it's something that we can do in California in an industrial park in a very efficient way. So that our system of manufacturing, we went through Cal Recycle. They gave us a greenhouse gas loan, additional $2 million in loan proceeds. We went out and purchased a brand new pulping system. It's a 300 kg system that has detrashing in it, so we'll be able to take more curbside waste and much more tape and labels and the rest of it. We'll be able to process that through, and we'll be able to create our own recycling system there in Manteca and produce an end product that we're selling to companies like L'Oreal, Unilever, 7th Generation, a long list of different customers. This was just the creativity of a woman, Julie Corbett, that started this business back in 2008, and we built this business, and we're continuing to expand it. But it takes time and money, and I can't thank Cal Recycle enough for everything they did to get us, to provide us with these loans, and that's really the market that's out there. Is Cal Recycle has been a great partner to us, and without their help, we really couldn't have penetrated the markets that we've penetrated. So big shout out to them and to the Chamber of Commerce for all the help that you provided. Manteca has been and San Joaquin County has been a great county for us to work in. There was very little bureaucracy in getting this plant up and running. I don't think people really appreciate the potential of this business and what we could eventually do with this business. It really could change the world, but it just takes time and money.
Hey, Judy, are you on the line from ARB still? Well, Judy, not Telly, is the, she's with the Ombudsman Office of ARB, and she's sitting on the line here. I'm sure she's taking copious notes on some of the coordination maybe with all the different air districts and ARB with the air districts that we can potentially do as well, because that seems to be an impediment with compost facilities. And I'll follow up with our local air pollution control district here in San Joaquin Valley to see what, what can be done to help coordinate with that. Let me see, who else can I call out?
I'm going to ask everybody that if you have a specific suggestion, like some of the things that have been brought up today, you can go to that CalRecycle web homepage and just Google in the Recycling Commission, and it'll pull up the page where there's a comment portal. And we have our next meeting next Wednesday. If you get your comments in, it's just 150 words, very simple. It'll just take you a minute to do it. And if you have a suggestion that we put in something to the effect of, that we ask Cal EPA to develop the statewide program EIR for the composting facility, or it's a permit with deadlines for these facilities, or provide technical assistance, or, permit streamlining gets implemented, whatever it is, we will literally by next Wednesday, we can refer those comments to a committee that will then take it up at the next meeting and then start that process of getting it into the final report. If we don't do it very soon, it will miss the initial deadline, and it will be not brought up until the July report. So I just encourage everybody to get those comments in if you want us to take them up.
Hey, Heidi, let me build on that, because as you know, you're a committee member on market development. And so we have been working on recommendation with some narrative. I'll be putting up the latest version of that on the Market Development Committee page on the Google Docs, which is linked from the CalRecycle page. So if you want to read that, the language that we're working on right now, you'll find it on the Google Docs. I hope we can get it on the Market Development CalRecycle page as well, but as you said, there's these accessibility issues that have to work around. So, but I think that, you may be able to just hone in on what we're talking about and give us some specific ideas around that, as well as new proposals like more programmatic EIRs. So.
Well, I mean, I feel like, we've all talked about this for literally 10 years, and it's time to actually do something. So I really, I'm hopeful that the commission, with your input, will come up with some good recommendations, hopefully January 1st. Everybody here now, hopefully, because of thanks to Frank, we got most people put their contact information in the chat box so you can reach each other after this webinar. And Frank, this will be posted somewhere, right? Where are you going to post the video in case people want to reflect on it?
Well, what I'm going to do, I'm going to get it out to the coordinating team for the BEN Summit, and also it will be posted on the greenteamsanjoaquin.com website, and we'll take it from there. Eddie is, when you're done, turn it over to Eddie Tolentino, or co-chair of the Green Team, for final comments. After you're done, Heidi.
Oh, okay. Well, I basically am done. I think we've all talked enough, for too many years. It's time to start executing on some of these really good ideas that were brought up by our speakers today. And I just want to thank everybody, but hopefully we'll all be motivated to start partnering and actually bring some of this to resolution, because I cannot see California making any major headway toward these goals if we cannot fix some of the problems we discussed here today, like permit streamlining and getting things to happen, facilities in California a lot faster, and make it business friendly. So with that, we will turn it over to Eddie. And thank you so much again, Frank, for having everybody and facilitating all this. We always appreciate it. Thank you.
Go ahead, Eddie. Oh.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. I'd like to echo Heidi's remarks. Time is of the essence, and the time is now to get something started. So with that, I'd like to thank all of our guest speakers, to all those who zoomed in into the Bin Summit, the Greater Stockton Chamber of Commerce, the Recycling Bin Coalition, the California Association Recycling Market Development Zone, and the sponsors of the Chamber's Green Team San Joaquin for supporting this event. Thank you, everyone. It was very informative and a beneficial summit. Look forward to a further, of course,